Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jack Morrison. I've been a park ranger for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything Death Valley had to throw at me. Heat that could kill you in 3 hours. Flash floods that came from nowhere. Tourists who thought they were smarter than the desert. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. It was July 15th, 1962, when the call came in. I was sitting in the ranger station at Furnace Creek, trying to stay cool in the morning shade. The thermometer already read 98 degrees, and it wasn't even 8 o'clock yet. "Jack, we got a problem," said my radio. It was headquarters in Lone Pine, crackling through the static. "Missing research team down at Badwater. 12 geologists from UC Berkeley. They were supposed to check in yesterday." I grabbed my water bottles and headed for the truck. Badwater Basin sits 282 feet below sea level, the lowest point in North America. It's a place where the heat bounces off white salt flats like light off a mirror. In July, it can hit 134 degrees down there. People die fast in that kind of heat. The drive took me 40 minutes on winding desert roads. As I got closer to Badwater, something felt wrong. The usual sounds were missing. No birds, no insects, nothing. Even the wind had stopped. Just dead silence under a blazing sun. I found their camp at the edge of the salt flats. 3 tents still standing. A camp stove with breakfast half cooked, beans still warm in the pan. Coffee cups sitting on a folding table, steam rising in the morning air, like they'd just stepped away for a minute. But their trucks were gone. I called out, "Hello, UC Berkeley team." My voice echoed across the white expanse, then died. No answer. The silence pressed down on me like a weight. I walked around the camp, looking for clues. 12 sleeping bags were laid out in the tents. Personal gear scattered around. Cameras, rock samples, notebooks. A wallet, lying open on a cot with family photos spilling out. These people had planned to come back. Then I saw the footprints. 12 sets of boot prints led away from camp, heading straight into the salt flats. But here's what made my skin crawl. Only 4 sets of prints came back. 8 people had walked out there and never returned. I followed the tracks for about 100 yards. The sun was getting higher and the heat was starting to hit me like a hammer. The prints just kept going straight into the worst part of the basin where no sane person would walk without water. That's when I heard the voice. "Help me! Please, someone help me!" It was coming from somewhere out in the flats. A man's voice, desperate and scared. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the horizon. Nothing but white salt and shimmering heat waves. "Where are you?" I shouted back. "Over here! I'm hurt!" The voice seemed to move. First it came from the north, then the east. I started walking toward it, my boots crunching on the salt. After 50 yards, I stopped. Something was wrong. The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. Then it hit me like a punch to the gut. The voice calling for help was mine. My own voice, asking for rescue. I backed away from the salt flats, my heart pounding. Desert heat can make you hear things, see things that aren't there. Mirages are common out here. Maybe that's all this was. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I drove back to the ranger station and called for backup. My partner, Ranger Williams, said he'd drive down from Stovepipe Wells. I also put in a call to the sheriff's department and requested a search helicopter. While I waited, I went through the missing team's gear more carefully. Their leader was Dr. Robert Peterson, a geology professor from Berkeley. His notebook was full of sketches and measurements of salt formations. The last entry was from yesterday's morning. Strange acoustic properties in the basin. Sounds carry differently here, almost like echoes coming from underground. That made my skin crawl. I also found a letter from Peterson's wife tucked into his journal. She was worried about him working in such a dangerous place. "Please be careful, Bobby," she'd written. "Come home safe to me." Around noon, Williams arrived. He was sweating through his uniform and his face was red from the heat. Any sign of them? He asked. Just tracks leading into the flats, and something else. I told him about the voice I'd heard. Williams frowned. Heat exhaustion can cause hallucinations, Jack. You sure you heard what you think you heard? Before I could answer, our radios crackled to life. This is Ranger Morrison, came a voice over the static. I need immediate assistance at Badwater Basin. Officer down. Repeat, officer down. Williams and I stared at each other. The voice on the radio was mine, but I hadn't made any call. Jack, did you... Williams started. That wasn't me, I said. The radio crackled again. Williams, are you there? Jack's been hurt. You need to get down here now. Williams grabbed his radio. This is Williams? Jack is standing right next to me. Who is this? Silence. Then my voice again, but different somehow. Hollow sounding. Please hurry. I'm bleeding. Williams was already moving toward his truck. I'm going to check it out. Wait, I said. Something's not right about this. But he was already driving away, kicking up a cloud of dust. I watched his truck disappear around a bend in the road. That was the last time I saw Williams alive. An hour passed. No word from Williams. I tried raising him on the radio, but got nothing back. The search helicopter was delayed. Mechanical problems. Finally, I couldn't wait any longer. I loaded my truck with extra water and medical supplies and headed back to Badwater. I found Williams' truck parked at the edge of the salt flats, door hanging open. His radio was smashed on the ground. Footprints led away from the truck. Williams' boots and it's something else. Bare feet, but huge. Way too big to be human. I followed the tracks. After a quarter mile, I found Williams. He was lying face down in the salt, his body already starting to mummify in the heat. When I rolled him over, I saw that his throat had been torn out. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that his lips were moving. His dead mouth was forming words, though no sound came out. I leaned closer and realized he was trying to speak. His lips formed the same word over and over again. Help. But it wasn't his voice in my head. It was mine. I backed away, my hands shaking. This wasn't possible. Dead men don't talk. But as I watched, William's body started to sit up. His head turned toward me, and his dead eyes looked right into mine. Jack, he said in my voice, why did you let me die? I ran. I left Williams there and ran back to my truck like my life depended on it, because I was starting to think it did. As I drove away, I heard my own voice calling after me from the salt flats. Don't leave me here, Jack. Please don't leave me here to die. I made it back to the ranger station and immediately called for help. Real help this time. I told them Williams was dead and that we had a serious situation at Badwater Basin. But when the backup team arrived 2 hours later, they couldn't find Williams' body. They found his truck, found the blood, found the tracks, but no body. You sure about what you saw, Morrison? Asked Sheriff Deputy Martinez. Heat exhaustion can cause some pretty vivid hallucinations. I wanted to believe that's all it was. But then one of the search team members called out from near the salt flats. Got a live one over here. We rushed over and found Dr. Peterson, the team leader from Berkeley. He was dehydrated and sunburned, barely conscious. We got him into the shade and gave him water. When he could finally talk, his story made my blood run cold. It took them, he whispered. One by one it called them away. What took them? I asked. The collector. That's what Sarah called it. It has all their voices now. Peterson's eyes were wild with fear. It started 3 days ago. We were taking measurements when we heard Janet's voice calling from the salt flats. But Janet was right there with us. When we looked, she was gone. Just vanished. He grabbed my arm with a grip that hurt. Then we heard Tom calling for help. But Tom was missing too. Every few hours, another voice would call out. Always someone from our team. Always someone who was already gone. Where are they now? I asked. Dead. All dead. I saw their bodies in a cave under the salt, dried up like jerky. But their mouths, he shuddered. Their mouths kept moving, making sounds. Peterson told us the creature was 8 feet tall, pale as bone, and could change its shape. But worst of all, it could perfectly copy any voice it heard. "It's been collecting voices for years," he said. "Maybe decades. I found old bodies in that cave. Prospectors, hikers, people who went missing in the desert. It keeps their voices forever." As if on cue, we heard a woman's voice calling from the salt flats. "Bobby? Bobby, where are you?" Peterson went white. "That's my wife, but she's in Berkeley. That thing is using her voice." The voice called again, closer now. "Bobby, I'm scared. Please help me." "Don't listen," Peterson whispered. "That's how it gets you. It uses the voices of people you love." But it was too late. One of the deputies, a young guy named Collins, was already walking toward the voice. "Ma'am," he called out, "are you hurt?" "Don't go out there," I shouted. Collins stopped and looked back at us. "Someone's in trouble. I have to help." That's when I saw it. Standing about 50 yards out in the salt flats was a woman in a white dress. She looked real as life, waving at us. "Bobby, please," she called in a perfect copy of Mrs. Peterson's voice. "I need you." The woman started walking toward us, and as she drew closer, I could see she wasn't quite right. Her movements were too smooth, like she was floating. Her face was beautiful but empty, like a mask. "It's not real," Peterson said. "Whatever you do, don't let it get close." But Collins was already walking toward the thing. "Ma'am, let me help you." The creature smiled, and when it did, I saw rows of teeth like broken glass. It reached out and touched Collins's face with one pale finger. Collins screamed. Not a human scream, but something else. Something that sounded like wind through a broken window. When the scream stopped, Collins was gone. Just vanished. But the creature now had his voice. "Help me," it called in Collins's voice. "It's got me. Please help." That's when the rest of us ran. We made it back to the ranger station, but I knew we weren't safe. The creature had voices now. Collins, Williams, all the missing geologists. It could call for help in any of their voices, and more backup would come running right into its trap. I got on the radio and warned everyone to stay away from Badwater Basin. No matter what voices they heard calling for help, no matter how real it sounded, they were not to respond. But it was too late. The creature was already using the voices. That evening, as the sun was setting, I heard William's voice outside the station. "Jack, open up. I need help." I looked out the window. Williams was standing there, looking exactly like he had that morning. No wounds, no blood. He waved at me. "Come on, Jack, it's me." But I remembered William's body with the torn throat. I remembered his dead lips forming words. "You're not Williams," I called through the door. The thing that looked like Williams smiled. "Of course I am. Who else would I be?" Then its face started to change. It became Collins, then Dr. Peterson, then people I'd never seen before. Each time it changed, it spoke in a different voice. "Let us in, Jack. We just want to talk. Please help us. Don't leave us out here to die." All the voices were begging, pleading, crying for help. But I knew they were all dead. All trapped in that thing's collection. The creature circled the station all night, changing faces and voices like trying on different clothes. Sometimes it was a little girl crying for her mommy. Sometimes it was an old man asking for water. Once it even sounded like my own mother, dead for 10 years. But I didn't open the door. When morning came, the voices stopped. I looked outside and saw nothing but empty desert. But I knew the creature was still out there, waiting. I packed my truck with supplies and weapons, my service pistol, a rifle, flares. If this thing wanted to hunt me, I'd give it a fight. I drove back to Badwater Basin one last time. I had to end this, had to find some way to stop it before it killed anyone else. The salt flats were quiet in the morning heat. No wind, no sound except the crunch of salt under my boots. I walked out into the basin, following the tracks from the missing geologists. After a mile, I found the cave Peterson had talked about. It was just a crack in the salt, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. But when I shined my flashlight inside, I saw them. Bodies. Dozens of them, maybe more. all dried up by the desert heat but preserved by the salt. And just like Peterson said, their mouths were moving. No sound, but their lips formed words over and over again. Help. Please. Save me. In the back of the cave, I found something else. Bones. Old bones. Some of them probably 100 years old. The creature had been hunting here for a long time. That's when I heard my own voice behind me. Find what you were looking for, Jack? I spun around. Standing at the cave entrance was me. Perfect copy, down to the last detail. It even wore my uniform. You can't stop this, it said in my voice. I've been collecting voices since before your grandfather was born. Yours will make a nice addition. The creature started walking toward me, and as it did, it began to change. Its skin became pale and stretched tight. Its fingers grew long and sharp. Its face became something that had never been human. Your voice will call so many people out here, it said. Other rangers, search teams, tourists, they'll all come running when they hear Jack Morrison calling for help. I raised my rifle and fired. The bullet passed right through it like shooting smoke. The creature laughed with my voice. You can't kill something that's already dead, Jack. But I noticed something. When the bullet passed through it, the creature flickered. Just for a second, it became less solid. I had an idea. A crazy, desperate idea. I grabbed my radio and turned it to the emergency frequency. Then I started talking. This is Ranger Jack Morrison, I said into the radio. I'm trapped at Badwater Basin. There's something here, something that steals voices. It's killed 12 people, maybe more. It can look like anyone, sound like anyone. Don't trust any calls for help from this area. Whatever you do, don't come here. The creature stopped moving toward me. What are you doing? I kept talking into the radio, telling everyone who might be listening the truth about what was happening. With each word, the creature became less solid, more transparent. You're ruining everything, it hissed. That's the idea, I said. The creature lunged at me, but its claws passed right through my chest. It was becoming weaker, more like smoke than flesh. I understood now. The creature fed on deception, on using stolen voices to lure victims. But when the truth was told, when people knew what to expect, it lost its power. I kept talking into the radio until the creature faded away completely. The last thing I heard was a sound like wind through the cave, and then silence. That was 3 months ago. The official report blamed the deaths on extreme heat, exposure and dehydration. The bodies we found in the cave were removed quietly, listed as historical remains. The whole thing was hushed up. But I know the truth, and I'm not the same man I was before. My voice changed after that day in the cave. It sounds hollow now, empty, like an echo of an echo. Sometimes when I talk, I can hear other voices mixed in with mine, whispers of the people that thing collected over the years. I put in for a transfer away from Death Valley, but they turned it down, said I was too valuable, knew the desert too well to lose. So I'm still here, still watching the salt flats. Because the creature isn't gone. Not really. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is still, I hear voices calling from Badwater Basin. Different voices now. Hikers who got lost, campers who wandered too far from their sites. The creature is rebuilding its collection, learning to be more careful. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the ranger station, I hear my own voice calling from the darkness outside. Jack, let me in. I'm cold out here. But I know it's not me. The real me is inside, writing this report, warning anyone who'll listen. If you ever find yourself in Death Valley and you hear someone calling for help from the salt flats, don't go. No matter how real it sounds, no matter whose voice it uses, don't go. Because in the Valley of Death, the dead still speak. And they're always hungry for more voices to add to their collection. My name is Jack Morrison, and this is what really happened at Badwater Basin in July of 1962. I'm putting this report in the station files, hoping that someday someone will believe me. The desert keeps its secrets well, but some secrets are too dangerous to keep. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I need to tell you what really happened in Glacier National Park during the winter of 1976. The official report says 8 maintenance workers died in a blizzard. Equipment failure, they wrote. Severe weather conditions. That's a lie. I've been a park ranger for 10 years now. Wilderness medicine specialist, they call me. I grew up in a Montana mining town where my grandmother used to tell stories about the Wendigo, winter spirits that made people hungry for human flesh. I always laughed at those old tales. Cannibalism legends, I told myself. Just frontier hysteria from starving miners. I wish I still believed that. It started in early December when the worst blizzard in 50 years hit Going to the Sun Road. We're talking about 40 feet of snow in some places. The wind was howling at 90 miles per hour, and the temperature dropped to 60 below with the wind chill. No planes could fly in that mess. No vehicles could move. We were completely cut off from the outside world. The maintenance crew was supposed to check the equipment sheds along the upper road before the big storm hit. 8 guys, led by Chief Martinez, a good man who'd worked the park for 15 years. They had enough supplies for a week. The storm was only supposed to last 3 days. On day 4, we lost radio contact. I remember sitting in the main ranger station, listening to static on the emergency channel. My partner, Jim, kept trying to raise them every hour. "Martinez, come in. This is base station." Nothing but wind noise through the speakers. "Maybe their radio froze up," Jim said, but I could hear the worry in his voice. By day 7, we knew something was wrong. The storm had cleared enough for me to put on snowshoes and check the access road. What I found made my stomach drop. The maintenance truck was buried under an avalanche about 2 miles from their shop. It empty. No bodies inside. They must have made it to shelter, I told myself, but my hands were shaking as I radioed back to base. The Blackfeet Reservation bordered our park, and some of the older tribal members worked with us during summer season. I'd heard them talk about this area in whispers. They called it the hungry place and said bad spirits lived in the high country during winter. Traditional knowledge, they called it respectfully, but I'd always filed it under superstition. Walking back through those snow-covered trees with the wind making sounds like voices calling my name, I started to wonder if maybe the old stories weren't so crazy after all. That night, something howled in the distance. Not a wolf. I know wolf calls. This was deeper, angrier. It sounded almost human, like someone screaming with their mouth full. Jim heard it too. "Probably just the wind," he said, but he double-checked the locks on all our doors. The next morning, I got permission to take the snowcat up to the maintenance shed. The machine could handle deep snow, and I had to know what happened to those men. Jim wanted to come with me, but someone needed to stay at base station in case we got word from the outside. "Be careful out there," he said as I climbed into the cab. Something feels wrong about this whole thing. The ride up took 3 hours through snow that sparkled like broken glass. The shed sat in a small clearing, surrounded by tall pine trees, heavy with white. From a distance, it looked normal. As I got closer, I saw the first sign of trouble. The door was hanging off its hinges, not broken inward like you'd expect from the storm. It was bent outward, like something inside had smashed its way out with incredible force. I parked the snowcat and grabbed my rifle, standard procedure when investigating potential wildlife encounters. Bears sometimes break into buildings lutau. King for food, though they should have been hibernating in December. Inside the shed, my flashlight beam revealed chaos. Shelves were knocked over, tools scattered everywhere, deep claws. Marks gouged the wooden walls, running from floor to ceiling, but these weren't bear claws. They were too long, too deliberate, almost like giant human fingernails had scraped the wood. In the corner, I found the first real evidence of what happened. A pile of clothes, Martinez's heavy winter coat, his wool cap, his boots, all torn to shreds like an animal had ripped them apart. But there was no blood on the fabric. It was like he'd just grown out of them. "Martinez," I called out. "Anyone here?" The wind answered with that same howling sound I'd heard the night before. Closer now, much closer. Behind the shed, I found tracks in the snow, human footprints leading away from the building. But they were wrong. Too big. The stride was impossibly long, like whoever made them had been taking 15-foot steps. and they were barefoot in the snow, which should have meant frostbite and death in minutes. I followed the tracks for maybe 50 yards before they just stopped, like the person had jumped straight up into the air and never came down. My radio crackled. "Elena, come in." I grabbed it with shaking hands. "Jim, thank God I'm at the shed. It's bad up here." "Elena, listen to me carefully. I just got a radio call." "From who?" "Martinez. But something's wrong with his voice. He says the crew is holed up in the emergency cabin near Devil's Creek. Says they need food. Says they're hungry. That's good news, right? They're alive." "Elena, I've been a ranger for 20 years. That wasn't Martinez talking. It sounded like him, but the words were all wrong. He kept saying hungry over and over, and he knew things, personal things about you that Martinez shouldn't know." My blood went cold. "What kind of things?" "He knew about your grandmother's stories, the Wendigo stories. He laughed about them, Elena, but his laugh sounded like breaking glass." I looked around the destroyed shed, at the impossible tracks in the snow, at the clothes torn apart by something with claws. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "The Wendigo is always hungry, mija, and it makes others hungry too. Jim, I'm coming back right now. Hurry. And Elena, that thing on the radio? It asked specifically for you." I drove the snowcat back as fast as I dared, but it was getting dark and the machine's headlights only cut through so much of the blowing snow. Every shadow looked like something moving between the trees. Every crack of a branch made me jump. Halfway back to the station, the engine died. I tried the starter again and again, but nothing happened. The fuel gauge showed half a tank, and the engine had been running fine. I grabbed my emergency pack and rifle, then stepped out into the freezing air to check under the hood. The battery cables had been cut, clean slices like someone had used bolt cutters, but the hood was locked and covered with snow that hadn't been disturbed. Whatever did this had worked from underneath the vehicle. While I was trying to figure out how that was possible, I heard voices calling my name. "Elena! Elena, help us!" It was Martinez's voice coming from the trees about 100 yards away, but something was off about it. The words echoed strangely, like he was shouting from the bottom of a well. "Martinez, is that you?" I called back. "Elena, we're so hungry. We need help. Come to us." I started walking toward the voice, then stopped. My grandmother had told me that Wendigos could copy human voices to lure people into the woods. But that was just folklore, right? "Martinez, come out where I can see you." The voice came again, but this time it was behind me. "Elena, we're starving. We need meat. Fresh meat." I spun around, rifle ready, but saw nothing except blowing snow and dark trees. When I turned back, there were fresh tracks leading toward my position. Barefoot tracks in the snow, just like at the shed. But here's what made my skin crawl. The tracks came from the direction of Martinez's voice, but they were coming toward me from 3 different angles, like 3 people were surrounding me in the dark. "Elena, don't run. We're your friends. We just need to eat." The voice was closer now, maybe 20 feet away, but I still couldn't see anyone. I backed toward the snowcat, keeping the rifle pointed into the trees. That's when I saw the eyes. Yellow eyes, reflecting my flashlight beam from about 8 feet off the ground, too high to be human. They blinked once, slowly, then disappeared. I ran. Behind me, something crashed through the trees, breaking branches as thick as my arm. Whatever was chasing me was big and fast and didn't care about obstacles. I could hear it breathing, deep, wet sounds like a man with pneumonia. The ranger station lights appeared through the snow just as my legs gave out. I stumbled through the front door and slammed it shut, throwing every deadbolt we had. Jim, where are you?" No answer. The main room was empty, but I could hear the radio crackling in the communications room. I crept over and looked inside. Jim was sitting at the radio console with his back to me. He wasn't moving. "Jim?" He turned around slowly. His face was pale as paper, and his eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the whole eye was black, like holes in his head. "Hello, Elena," he said in Martinez's voice. "We've been waiting for you." I shot Jim in the chest. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't Jim anymore. When the bullet hit him, he didn't fall down or cry out. He just looked down at the hole in his jacket and started laughing. Black blood oozed out instead of red. "You can't kill us," he said, still using Martinez's voice. "We're already dead. We died when the hunger took us." I ran for the emergency supplies room and barricaded myself inside. Through the thin walls, I could hear Jim, or whatever was wearing Jim's body, moving around the station, opening and closing doors, looking for me. The radio in the supply room was still working. I tried calling for help, but all I got was static. Then Martinez's voice came through the speakers. "Elena, we know you're scared, but you don't have to be. The hunger is beautiful. It makes everything simple. No more worries about your job or your future or your grandmother's old stories. Just the hunt and the feast." "What did you do to my partner?" I whispered into the microphone. "Jim volunteered. He came looking for us at Devil's Creek, just like you wanted. We showed him the truth about hunger. How good it feels to finally eat what you really want." Outside the supply room, something scratched at the door. Long, slow scrapes, like fingernails on wood. "The others are coming, Elena, all 8 of us. We're faster now, and stronger. The Wendigo spirit lives in us, and it's hungry for someone new." I looked around the supply room for weapons. Emergency flares, a small axe for cutting firewood, and a can of bear spray. Not much against 8 cannibalistic monsters. "Your grandmother was right about the old stories," Martina's voice continued. "But she didn't tell you the best part. When the hunger takes you, you remember everything. Every person you ever loved, every meal you ever ate, and none of it satisfies you anymore. Only fresh human flesh tastes good." The scratching at the door stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet, except for the wind outside. Then the lights went out. My flashlight beam showed the door starting to bend inward. Something was pushing against it with incredible strength. The wood groaned and cracked. I grabbed the axe and stood ready. The door splintered apart, and Jim's thing crawled through the opening. But it didn't look like Jim anymore. Its arms were too long, and its fingers ended in claws. Its teeth had grown into sharp points, and when it opened its mouth, I could see down its throat to something that pulsed like a second heart. "Don't make this hard," it said in Jim's voice. "The hunger only hurts for a little while." I swung the axe as hard as I could and buried it in the creature's shoulder. It howled and stumbled back, but didn't go down. Black blood sprayed across the walls. That's when I heard the other voices outside. 7 more of them, calling my name in different voices. Martinez and the rest of the maintenance crew, all hungry, all coming for me. I grabbed the emergency flares and the bear spray, then smashed the window with the back of the axe. The glass cut my hands, but I squeezed through and dropped into the snow outside. The creatures were all around the building now. I could see them moving in the darkness, tall, thin shapes that used to be human. They moved wrong, like their joints bent in directions they shouldn't. "Elena," they called in unison. "Don't run. You can't escape the hunger forever." I lit 3 flares at once and threw them in different directions. The red light showed me their faces clearly for the first time. They still looked partly human, but stretched and wrong. Their skin was gray as old meat, and their eyes were black holes. Some of them were naked despite the freezing cold, and I could see their ribs pressing against their skin like they were starving. But the worst part was that I recognized them. Martinez standing near the generator shed. Billy Patterson from the maintenance crew, crouched on top of the equipment building like a giant spider. Jim, bleeding from where I'd hit him with the axe. They were all people I'd known and worked with, people who had families and hobbies and favorite foods. Now they were monsters that wanted to eat me. "The flares won't save you," Martinez called out, "but come to us willingly and we'll make it quick." I sprayed the bear spray at the closest creature and ran for the snowcat. Maybe I could get the engine started, or at least get to the radio. Behind me, the thing that used to be Billy Patterson let out a shriek, like a mountain lion. Then I heard all of them running through the snow, their feet making wet slapping sounds. The snowcat's engine turned over on the 3rd try. I gunned it toward the main road, praying the machine could outrun whatever was chasing me. In the rearview mirror, I saw them following. 8 nightmare shapes bounding through the snow with impossible speed, their black eyes reflecting the taillights like a pack of wolves. I drove for 6 hours through the worst blizzard of my life, using the Snowcat's GPS to navigate roads I couldn't see. The fuel gauge dropped steadily toward empty, but the creatures had stopped following after the first few miles. Maybe they couldn't travel too far from their territory, or maybe they were just waiting for me to run out of gas. When I finally reached the highway, a state trooper found me half frozen and babbling about monsters. They brought me to the hospital, where doctors treated me for exposure and exhaustion. When I told them what happened, they scheduled me for a psychiatric evaluation. The official investigation concluded that the maintenance crew died in an avalanche. Jim's body was found in the communications room, apparently killed by a wild animal that had broken into the station. The investigators said it was probably a bear, disturbed from hibernation by the storm. They never found the other 8 bodies. I was transferred to a different park in California. Desk duty, they said, until I recovered from my traumatic stress episode. But I know what I saw up there, and I know those things are still in Glacier National Park, waiting for the next group of people to get trapped by winter weather. The worst part is what happened to me afterward. Within a month of my return to civilization, I started having dreams about the taste of human flesh. Vivid, detailed dreams that left me hungry when I woke up. My doctor said it was normal trauma response, but I knew better. I started avoiding crowded places because I would look at people and imagine how they might taste. Children especially made my mouth water, which terrified me more than anything I'd experienced in those mountains. 6 months later, I quit the Park Service and moved to a small town in Nevada where I could be alone. I tell people I'm a retired government worker. They don't ask many questions. Every winter, when the snow starts falling, I feel the hunger getting stronger. I've learned to lock myself in my house and eat nothing but canned food until spring comes. But each year it gets harder to resist. Sometimes I catch myself following lone hikers when I see them on the trails near my house. I tell myself I'm just being social, but I know that's not true. I'm hunting them. The Wendigo spirit touched me that night in the mountains, and now it lives inside me too. I'm writing this down because I need people to know the truth about what happened in Glacier National Park. If you ever find yourself trapped in the wilderness during winter and you hear voices calling your name from the woods, don't follow them, no matter how familiar they sound, no matter how much they beg for help. And if you ever meet a park ranger named Elena Rodriguez, the one who survived the equipment failure incident in 1976, you should probably run, because I'm hungry, and I'm getting hungrier every year. The only question now is how much longer I can fight it. My name is Marcus Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger at Sleeping Bear Dunes for 15 years. Before that, I spent 12 years as a detective in Detroit, dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. I thought I'd seen everything: murder, drugs, violence that would make your stomach turn. When I took this job, I figured the biggest threat I'd face would be drunk campers or maybe a black bear getting into someone's cooler. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. Sleeping Bear Dunes sits on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, stretching 35 miles of wilderness that most folks never see. Sure, tourists come for the sand dunes and the pretty views, but they stick to the main trails. They don't venture into the deep woods where the old Ottawa stories still echo through the trees. Stories about things that hunt when the moon turns red. I used to laugh at those stories. Dogmen are just diseased wolves standing upright, I'd tell the other rangers. People see what they want to see when they're scared. The campground family changed my mind about that. It was October 1987, and we were getting ready for a rare lunar eclipse. The kind that turns the moon blood red and brings out all the crazies with their cameras and telescopes. I'd been working extra shifts because the Park Service expected bigger crowds than usual. Most rangers hate eclipse duty, but I didn't mind. After Detroit, a few hippies chanting at the moon seemed like easy money. The campgrounds had been camping at Platte River for 3 days. Nice family from Grand Rapids: Mom, Dad, 4 kids ranging from 8 to 16. They'd reserved the same campsite for 5 years running. Bob Campground was the kind of guy who wore his Eagle Scout pin on his jacket and kept his campsite cleaner than most people keep their homes. His wife Sarah made the best camp coffee I'd ever tasted, and their kids woo. They're polite enough to say yes sir and no sir without being told. I should have paid more attention to the signs that weekend, the way the birds went quiet around sunset, how the deer stayed clear of the river even though it was their main water source. The park's own wildlife, raccoons, possums, even the mice, all seemed to vanish overnight. Nature has a way of knowing when something's wrong, but we humans are too smart to listen. On my last patrol Friday night, everything seemed normal. The campgrounds had their fire burning low, and I could hear Bob telling his youngest boy about constellations. The eclipse wasn't supposed to start until tomorrow, but the moon was already looking strange, bigger somehow, with a weird orange tint around the edges. "Beautiful night, Ranger Blackthorn," Sarah called out when she saw my truck. "Sure is, ma'am. You folks have everything you need?" "More than enough," Bob said, patting a cooler with his foot. "Looking forward to tomorrow night's show." Their 8-year-old Tommy was sitting by the fire whittling a piece of pine with a pocket knife his grandpa had given him. Kid barely looked up when I stopped by, but I noticed he kept glancing toward the tree line like he was watching for something. "You okay there, Tommy?" He nodded but didn't speak. His older brother Jake laughed and ruffled his hair. "Tommy thinks he heard howling earlier. Dad told him it was just coyotes, but you know how little kids are." I did know. In Detroit, kids got scared of sirens and gunshots. Out here, it was animal sounds and shadows between the trees. Tommy was probably just adjusting to being away from the city. "Coyotes are nothing to worry about," I told him. "They're more scared of you than you are of them." Tommy finally looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. Not fear exactly, but something older. Like he knew a secret he wasn't supposed to know. "It wasn't coyotes," he said quietly. Before I could ask what he meant, his father was already steering the conversation away from scary stories. We talked about the eclipse timing and the best viewing spots, and I reminded them about the fire restrictions. Normal ranger stuff. Nothing that should have kept me awake that night, but it did. I kept thinking about Tommy's eyes and the way the woods felt different. Too quiet. Like something was holding its breath, waiting. I found them at sunrise. My radio crackled to life at 6:15 a.m. with a call from dispatch about campers who'd missed their checkout time. The campgrounds were supposed to be out by noon the day before, but their campsite was still occupied and no one was answering when other campers tried to get their attention. "Probably just sleeping in," I told Janet back at headquarters. "I'll swing by and wake them up." The drive to Platte River usually took 20 minutes, but I made it in 15. Something about the radio call bothered me, though I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was the way Janet's voice sounded tight when she described the complaint. Or maybe it was the dream I'd had, the one where Tommy was running through the woods, screaming about wolves that walked like men. I smelled it before I saw it. Blood, lots of blood, the kind of metallic stench that gets in your nose and stays there. I'd smelled it plenty of times in Detroit, usually in apartments where someone had been dead for days. But this was different, fresher, more violent. The campground's RV was on its side. Let me say that again because it took me a minute to process what I was seeing. Their 30-foot Winnebago was completely overturned, lying on the driver's side like a toy a giant kid had gotten tired of playing with. The thing had to weigh 8,000 pounds empty, and it was packed with camping gear. I grabbed my radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Blackthorn. I need backup at Platte River Campsite 12. I've got a situation here." "What kind of situation, Marcus?" I walked closer to the overturned RV, and that's when I saw the claw marks, deep gouges in the aluminum siding that went all the way through to the interior. Whatever made those marks had been trying to get inside, and from the look of things, it had succeeded. "Multiple fatalities," I said into the radio. "Send everybody." The smell got worse as I circled the wreckage. I found Bob first, or what was left of him. He was pinned under the RV's awning, and his chest looked like something had opened it with a can opener. Sarah was 20 feet away, dragged halfway into the tree line. The teenagers were scattered around the campsite like broken dolls. I'd seen plenty of murders in Detroit, but nothing like this. This wasn't human violence. This was something that hunted for sport. The claw marks were everywhere. Deep gouges in trees 12 feet off the ground. Scratches in the metal picnic table that went all the way through the steel. Whatever did this was strong enough to flip an RV and smart enough to hunt systematically. I was photographing the scene when I heard crying. Soft, terrified sobbing coming from somewhere near the overturned RV. I drew my service weapon, a .357 that had never let me down in 12 years of police work, and followed the sound. "Hello? Is someone there?" The crying stopped. "This is Ranger Blackthorn. If you're hurt, I can help you." A small voice answered from inside a drainage culvert under the access road. "Are they gone?" Tommy Campground crawled out of that pipe like a ghost. He was covered in mud and blood, mostly not his own, and his eyes had that 1,000-yard stare I'd seen on combat veterans. Kid was 8 years old and looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. "Tommy, what happened here?" He looked at me for a long time before answering. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet I had to lean to and down to hear him. "The wolfmen came when the moon got red." I figured he was in shock. Trauma does strange things to memory, especially in kids. But as I wrapped him in my jacket and waited for backup, Tommy told me exactly what he'd seen. And the more he talked, the less I wanted to believe him. "They walked on two legs like people, but they had wolf heads and big teeth. Their eyes glowed red in the dark. There were 5 of them, and they surrounded our camp like they planned it. Tommy, I think you had a nightmare. Sometimes when scary things happen..." "No." His voice was firm for an 8-year-old. I saw them change. The biggest one was a man at first, then it got hairy and its face got long like a dog. It threw our RV over with one hand. I wanted to tell him that was impossible. Wanted to explain that people don't turn into wolves and wolves don't hunt in coordinated packs and nothing on earth was strong enough to flip an RV by itself. But I'd seen those claw marks. I'd seen the systematic way the family had been taken apart. And I'd spent enough time in the woods to know that normal predators don't behave like this. "Where were you when this happened?" "Hiding in the pipe. Grandpa always told me if something bad happened, find the smallest space you can and stay there until help comes." Tommy's voice broke. "I heard them calling to each other while they hurt my family. It didn't sound like wolves. It sounded like they were talking." The backup rangers arrived an hour later, followed by county sheriff's deputies and a crime scene team from Traverse City. They looked at the overturned RV and the scattered remains and came to the same conclusion I wanted to reach. Aggressive bear attack, maybe a whole family of bears. But bears don't leave claw marks in steel. Bears don't hunt in coordinated packs. And bears sure as hell don't flip RVs. I kept my mouth shut about Tommy's story. The kid had been through enough without adults telling him he was crazy. But that night, alone in my cabin, I did something I hadn't done since my police academy days. I researched everything I could find about werewolves. The attacks started happening every few days after that. Not people. At least not at first. We found deer torn apart and scattered across hiking trails. Raccoons and possums hung from tree branches like some kind of twisted Christmas decorations. The park's maintenance crew discovered our radio tower had been destroyed, all the support cables cut through with something sharp enough to slice steel. Vandals, the park superintendent decided. Probably the same ones who killed those campers. But I knew better. I'd been watching the woods at night, and the woods were watching me back. Tommy stayed with his aunt in Grand Rapids, but he called me twice a week. Kid was seeing a therapist, but he wasn't getting better. If anything, he was getting worse. More specific about what he'd seen. More insistent that the wolf men were still out there. "They're waiting for the next moon," he told me during one of our calls. "The red moon made them stronger, but they can change any time now. Grandpa's stories said they could." "What stories, Tommy?" "About the Ottawa warriors who made a deal with evil spirits. They got the power to turn into wolves so they could protect their people. But the spirits tricked them, made them hungry for human meat instead. Grandpa said they've been living in the deep woods ever since, waiting for the right time to come back. I'd heard similar stories from other rangers, usually late at night around campfires when everyone had been drinking. Local folklore about shapeshifters and moon beasts that hunted the shoreline. Stories that went back hundreds of years, passed down through native families who'd lived here long before the Park Service showed up. Stories I was starting to take seriously. The next attack happened on a Tuesday night in November. A group of hunters had set up Camp Ney, the Sleeping Bear Point Lighthouse, about 10 miles from where the campgrounds died. They were experienced woodsmen, well-armed and careful about their campsite security. I found their trucks first. 3 pickups parked in a neat line, but every tire had been shredded and every window smashed. The vehicles looked like they'd been hit by a tornado, except tornadoes don't leave claw marks. The hunters themselves were gone. Not dead. Gone. Their campsite was destroyed, tents ripped to pieces and gear scattered everywhere. But there were no bodies, just drag marks leading into the forest and more of those impossible claw scratches in the trees. I followed the trail for half a mile before I found the first hunter. He was wedged 20 feet up in an oak tree, his rifle bent in half and his neck twisted at an angle that shouldn't have been possible. Below him, carved into the bark with surgical precision, was a symbol I didn't recognize. It looked like a wolf's head with arrows pointing in 4 directions. The other 2 hunters were displayed in similar ways, positioned like scarecrows throughout the forest. Whatever killed them had taken its time, arranged them deliberately. This wasn't random predator behavior. This was a message. I was photographing the scene when I heard something that made my blood freeze. Howling. Not like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. This was deeper, more complex, like human voices trying to mimic animal sounds, and it was coming from multiple directions surrounding me. I drew my .357 and backed toward my truck, scanning the tree line for movement. The howling got closer, and I could hear branches breaking as something large moved through the underbrush. That's when I saw the eyes, red pinpoints of light floating in the darkness between the trees. Too high off the ground to be wolves, too steady to be flashlights. They moved in patterns, coordinated like a hunting pack positioning itself for an attack. I made it to my truck just as the first one stepped into the clearing. It looked like someone had tried to build a wolf using human parts. 7 feet tall, walking upright but hunched forward like it was ready to drop to all 4s. Its head was definitely canine, long snout full of teeth that belonged on something twice its size, but its body was wrong. Too muscular, too coordinated, too smart. It looked right at me and smiled. Wolves don't smile. But this thing did, showing off fangs that could tear through steel. Behind it, I could see others moving in the shadows, a whole pack of them surrounding my truck like they were deciding whether to attack or let me go. I fired 3 shots through the windshield. The bullets hit the creature's center mass, and I watched them flatten against its chest like I was shooting at a brick wall. The impact didn't even knock it backward. It just kept smiling and took a step closer to my truck. I floored the accelerator and got out of there, leaving rubber on the dirt road and not slowing down until I reached the main highway. In my rearview mirror, I could see shapes moving on the road behind me, keeping pace with my truck despite the fact that I was doing 60 miles an hour. They followed me for 5 miles before disappearing back into the forest. When I got home, I loaded every weapon I owned and spent the rest of the night sitting by my window watching the tree line. Just before dawn, I heard that howling again, closer this time, like they knew where I lived. Like they were letting me know they could find me anytime they wanted. The next morning, I called in sick and drove to Grand Rapids to talk to Tommy. The kid took one look at me and nodded like he'd been expecting this conversation. "You saw them, didn't you?" "Yeah, Tommy, I saw them." "Did you try to shoot them?" "How did you know that?" Tommy pulled out a piece of paper covered with crayon drawings. Stick figures with wolf heads and red eyes surrounding a small house. At the bottom, he'd write, "And bullets don't work in shaky 8-year-old handwriting. Grandpa told me the old stories before he died. The wolfmen can't be hurt by regular weapons. You need silver bullets, or fire, or..." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Or what, Tommy?" "Or you have to become one of them." But Grandpa said that's worse than dying. I stared at the kids' drawings and felt something cold settle in my stomach. If Tommy was right, if these things were bulletproof, then everyone in the park was defenseless, including me. Tommy, is there anything else your grandpa told you? Anything that might help? The boy thought for a minute, then dug through a box of his belongings and pulled out an old leather pouch. Grandpa gave me this before he got sick. Said it was real silver from the old mine up north. He made it into arrowheads, but I guess you could melt them down and make bullets. Inside the pouch were 6 silver arrowheads, tarnished black with age, but definitely real. They felt heavier than they should have and warm to the touch despite the cold weather. Tommy, I can't take these. They belong to your grandfather. He gave them to me to keep my family safe. The kid's voice was steady, but I could see tears starting in his eyes. I couldn't save them. Maybe you can save somebody else. I took the arrowheads and drove back to Sleeping Bear Dunes, making a stop at a gun shop in Traverse City on the way. The owner was an old-timer who'd been reloading ammunition since before I was born. When I showed him the silver and explained what I needed, he didn't ask any questions. Wolf problems, was all he said. Something like that. I'll have 6 rounds ready for you tomorrow. But mister, if you're hunting what I think you're hunting, 6 bullets might not be enough. That night I sat in my cabin cleaning my .357 and wondering if I'd completely lost my mind. Part of me still wanted to believe there was a rational explanation for everything that had happened. Drug dealers with exotic pets, maybe, or a traveling circus that had lost some trained animals. But I had seen those red eyes. I'd watched bullets bounce off that thing's chest like they were made of rubber. And somewhere out there in the woods, a pack of creatures that shouldn't exist was hunting people for sport. The moon was getting full again, and according to Tommy's grandfather's stories, that's when they'd be strongest. I had 6 silver bullets and no backup. It would have to be enough. The final attack came on the night of the next full moon, exactly 1 month after the campgrounds died. I was on patrol near the visitor center when my radio started picking up screams. Not animal sounds this time, human voices, terrified and desperate. A family camping at Platte River, the same area where this all started. I should have called for backup. Should have waited for the county sheriff or the state police, but I knew they wouldn't get there in time, and even if they did, their bullets wouldn't do any good. I loaded my 6 silver rounds and drove toward the screaming. The Henderson family had made the same mistake as the campgrounds, camping in an isolated spot during a full moon. By the time I arrived, their camp was already under attack. I could see shapes moving around their RV, too large and too coordinated to be normal wolves. I parked 50 yards away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows and trying to get a clear shot. Through my binoculars, I could see at least 4 of the creatures. They were taking their time, playing with their prey like cats with mice. The Hendersons were trapped inside their RV, and the wolfmen were methodically tearing it apart. I watched one of them peel back the aluminum siding like it was opening a can of sardines. Another was on the roof, clawing through the metal with surgical precision. I took aim at the largest one and fired. The silver bullet caught it in the shoulder and spun it around like a rag doll. For the first time, since this nightmare started, I heard one of them scream in pain. A sound like metal grinding against metal, mixed with something that might have been human. The other 3 turned toward me immediately, their red eyes locking onto my position. I fired twice more, hitting one in the chest and missing the third completely. The wounded creatures fell backward, but they didn't die. They just got angry. Very angry. The pack charged my position like a freight train. I emptied my remaining 3 bullets, hitting 2 more targets but not stopping their advance. Within seconds, they were close enough that I could smell their breath. A mixture of rotten meat and something chemical that burned my nose. I ran. Not toward my truck, because they would have caught me before I could get the engine started. Instead, I ran toward the visitor center, a concrete building with steel doors and no windows. If I could get inside and barricade myself, maybe I could last until sunrise. The creatures followed me across the parking lot, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I could hear their claws clicking on the asphalt behind me, getting closer with every step. I made it to the visitor center door just as the lead creature's claws raked across my back, tearing through my jacket and into the skin underneath. I slammed the door and threw the deadbolt, then dragged a desk in front of it for good measure. The pounding started immediately. Not random scratching or clawing, but deliberate rhythmic hammering like they were using tools. The steel door held, but I could see it bending inward with each impact. That's when I heard the small voice behind me. "Ranger Blackthorn?" I spun around and found Tommy Campground sitting in the corner of the visitor center holding a flashlight and a small backpack. He looked older than when I'd seen him last month, and there was something different about his eyes. They reflected the light like an animal's. "Tommy, what are you doing here? How did you get inside?" "I came back to finish this. Grandpa visited me in a dream and told me what I had to do." The kid's voice was calm, almost adult. He said the curse could only be broken by someone from the family that started it. "What are you talking about?" The pounding on the door got louder, and I could hear wood splintering as the creatures worked their way through the barricade. We had maybe 5 minutes before they broke through. My grandpa's great-grandfather was one of the original warriors who made the deal with the spirits. Our family has been carrying the curse for generations, trying to find a way to end it. Tommy opened his backpack and pulled out a bundle of sage, some kind of carved bone whistle, and a knife that looked older than the building we were hiding in. "Tommy, you're 8 years old. You can't fight those things." "I'm not going to fight them. I'm going to call them home." Before I could stop him, Tommy walked to the center of the room and started arranging the sage in a complex pattern on the floor. The bone whistle went in the middle, and he cut his palm with the ancient knife, letting blood drip onto the sage. The pounding on the door stopped. "That's right," Tommy called out, his voice carrying clearly through the building. "You know what this is. You know why I'm here." He put the whistle to his lips and blew a note that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his lungs. The sound was hauntingly beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like whale song mixed with human grief. The door exploded inward. All 5 creatures poured through the opening at once, moving like water flowing around obstacles. Up close, in the artificial light of the visitor center, they looked even more wrong than they had in the forest. Their fur was matted with blood and dirt. Their muscles bulged in places where muscles shouldn't exist, and their eyes burned with intelligence that was definitely not animal. But when they saw Tom, Mai, and his ritual circle, they stopped. The largest one, the pack leader, shifted its weight and made a sound that might have been words. Tommy answered in the same guttural language, and I watched their conversation with growing amazement. The kid was negotiating with monsters, and they were listening. "What are you telling them?" "The truth. That the curse ends tonight, one way or another." Tommy looked at me with those strange, reflective eyes. "Either they go back to the spirit world where they belong, or I join them and we hunt together forever." "No, there has to be another way." "There isn't. Grandpa tried everything. This is the only choice the spirits will accept." The pack leader stepped closer to Tommy, and I could see it was considering the offer. The other creatures watched their alpha, waiting for a decision. The air in the room felt thick with supernatural energy, like the moment before lightning strikes. Tommy blew the whistle again, longer this time, and the creatures began to change. Their shapes flowed like smoke, shifting from wolf men back to human forms. I watched in fascination and horror as 5 naked people stood where the monsters had been. They looked normal except for their eyes, which still glowed red in the darkness. The pack leader was a woman, maybe 40 years old, with scars covering her arms and chest. She looked at Tommy with something that might have been respect. "You carry the blood," she said in accented English. "You have the right to choose." "I choose to end this. No more hunting. No more killing. You go back where you came from, and the curse dies with me." The woman nodded slowly, then looked at me. "The ranger has seen too much. He must choose as well. Join us or die here." I thought about my .357, empty now except for the silver bullets I'd fired. Thought about the backup that was still hours away. Thought about all the people who would die if these creatures continued hunting. "I choose to live," I said, "and to make sure this story gets told the right way." The woman smiled, showing teeth that were still all too sharp. "The ranger chooses wisdom. We accept." She turned back to Tommy, and her expression became almost maternal. "You are young to carry such weight." Grandpa said the spirits would make it quick if I asked them to. Tommy knelt beside his ritual circle and placed both hands on the bone whistle. The sage began to burn without any flame, filling the room with sweet smoke that made my eyes water. "Tell people what really happened here," he said to me. "Don't let them blame it on rabid wolves or crazy people. Tell them about the curse and about the choice I made." The smoke got thicker, and the creatures began to fade. Not disappearing exactly, but becoming transparent, like they were made of mist instead of flesh and bone. Tommy was fading too. "Wait!" I called out, but my voice sounded distant, like I was shouting across a vast canyon. "Tommy, there has to be another way!" The boy looked at me one last time, and I saw him as he really was. Not an 8-year-old kid, but an old soul carrying the weight of generations. He'd known this moment was coming since the night his family died, maybe longer. "Take care of the forest, Ranger Blackthorn. Keep people safe." The smoke cleared, and I was alone in the visitor center. The door was still broken, the furniture was still scattered, but there was no sign that 5 supernatural creatures had been in the room moments before. No sign except for a small pile of ash where Tommy's ritual circle had been, and the lingering smell of sage. The official report blamed the attacks on a pack of hybrid wolves that had been illegally bred and released into the park. The state brought in a team of wildlife experts who found no evidence of supernatural activity, but plenty of evidence that something large and dangerous had been hunting in the area. They never found the bodies of the creatures I'd shot with silver bullets. The SE Arch teams found the impact sites, found trees with bullet holes and blood on the bark, but no corpses, just more ash, like what was left of Tommy's ritual. I kept my mouth shut about what really happened. Who would believe it? Instead, I wrote up the sanitized version that everyone wanted to hear. Aggressive wildlife, isolated incidents, threat neutralized. The park reopened 2 weeks later with increased security patrols and new warning signs about dangerous animals. But I know the truth. And sometimes, late at night, when the moon is full, I think about Tommy Campground and the choice he made. An 8-year-old boy who sacrificed himself to end a curse that had lasted for generations. A kid who became a hero that no one will ever remember. The attacks stopped after that night, completely. The deer came back to Platte River, the birds started singing again, and the forest felt normal for the first time in months. Whatever Tommy did, it worked. I've been patrolling these woods for 3 more years since then, and I've never seen anything like those creatures again. No red eyes watching from the shadows, no inhuman howling in the distance, no impossible claw marks in the trees. But I still carry silver bullets in my .357, just in case. Because Tommy told me to keep people safe, and I take that responsibility seriously. The curse might be broken, but there are other things in these woods. Older things. Things that remember when humans were just another prey animal struggling to survive in the wilderness. Sometimes when I'm doing my night patrol, I hear whispers in the wind that sound like Tommy's voice, warning me about things moving in the deep forest, about campers who wander too far from the marked trails, about the responsibility that comes with knowing the truth. The Park Service thinks I'm getting paranoid in my old age. They've started hinting that maybe it's time for me to retire, move somewhere warmer, and let younger rangers handle the night shifts. They don't understand that some jobs choose you, and you can't walk away from them until the job is done. I'll stay here as long as these woods need protecting, as long as there are stories that need to be told and choices that need to be witnessed. Tommy Campground saved a lot of lives that night in the visitor center, and the least I can do is make sure his sacrifice meant something. The moon is getting full again. Time for another patrol, just in case. My name is William Strongwater, but everyone calls me Bill. I've been a ranger in Cherokee National Forest for 18 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, even a few drug runners thinking they could hide in the backcountry. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found in Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest that October. I'm 46 years old, half Cherokee on my grandmother's side, though I never put much stock in the old stories she used to tell. Sacred grounds, guardian spirits, ancient protectors, that was all just allegory, right? Ways for our ancestors to teach respect for the wilderness. At least that's what I told myself every morning when I laced up my boots and headed into some of the most untouched forest in Tennessee. Joyce Kilmer is special, even by national forest standards. We're talking about 3,800 acres of virgin old-growth wilderness, trees that were standing when Christopher Columbus was still figuring out which way was west. Some of these giants are over 400 years old, towering poplars and hemlocks that create a canopy so thick it's like walking through a living cathedral. It's roadless territory. Takes 3 days of hard hiking just to reach the nearest town if something goes wrong. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Marcus Webb from the University of Tennessee had been leading an archaeological team studying Cherokee burial mounds deep in the forest. They'd been out there for a week, properly permitted. Everything by the book, or so I thought. They missed their check-in yesterday, my supervisor told me over the radio. No response on their satellite phone either. You know that area better than anyone, Bill. Can you head out there and see what's going on? I did know the area. Maybe too well. Those burial mounds Dr. Webb was studying sat in a Pichobi, art of the forest that had always felt different, heavier somehow. The kind of place where the birds went quiet and the air seemed to press down on your shoulders. My grandmother used to say places like that were where the old spirits still walked, protecting what was sacred. But spirits don't make people miss check-ins. Bad weather does. Equipment failure does. Sometimes people just get careless and accidents happen. I packed 3 days' worth of supplies and set out at dawn. The trail to the burial site wound through the deepest part of the forest where the trees grew so close together you could barely see the sky. Every step took me further from the modern world and deeper into something that felt ancient and watching. The first sign something was wrong came about 2 hours in. I'd been hearing birds singing all morning. The usual forest symphony of wrens and cardinals and woodpeckers. Then, all at once, they stopped. Complete silence, like someone had thrown a switch. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I'd spent enough time in these woods to know that when nature goes quiet, there's usually a good reason. Could be a predator nearby, could be a storm coming. But the sky was clear, and I hadn't seen any bear sign on the trail. I kept walking, but my hand moved to the radio on my belt. The silence followed me like a living thing, spreading through the forest as I passed. Even my own footsteps seemed too loud, crunching on the fallen leaves. By the time I reached the outer perimeter of the burial site, I knew something was very, very wrong. The first thing I saw was the equipment. Dr. Webb's team had been using ground-penetrating radar to map the burial mounds without disturbing them. At least, that's what their permit application said. But now their expensive gear was scattered across the clearing like a tornado had hit it. Tripods bent in half, screens cracked, cables strung through the trees like Christmas lights. But no tornado could explain what I found next. The burial mounds themselves had been torn open, not carefully excavated like you'd expect from archaeologists, but ripped apart like some giant had clawed through them with its bare hands. Sacred artifacts were scattered everywhere. Pottery shards, bone tools, pieces of what looked like ceremonial masks. Things that should have been treated with reverence were scattered like garbage. My grandmother's voice whispered in the back of my mind. The dead don't rest easy when their graves are disturbed, Billy. Especially not the medicine men. They guard their secrets, even in death. I shook my head to clear it. Focus on the facts, Bill. Where was the team? I found their tents about 50 yards away, still standing, but empty. Sleeping bags were laid out neatly, personal belongings organized and accounted for. No signs of struggle. It was like they'd just vanished. That's when the headache hit. It started as a dull throb behind my eyes, but within seconds it felt like someone was driving railroad spikes through my skull. I staggered, pressing my palms against my temples. And that's when I heard it. Voices, speaking Cherokee. At first I thought it was my radio picking up interference, but the words were coming from inside my head. I could understand them. My grandmother had taught me enough of the old language, but the voices were speaking about things that didn't make sense, about violations and sacred ground and ancient promises. Stranger walks among the bones of our ancestors. He carries their blood, but does he carry their respect? I spun around, looking for the source of the voices, but the clearing was empty. Just me and the destroyed equipment and the violated graves. "Hello?" I called out. "Dr. Webb? If anyone can hear me, please respond." The voices in my head grew louder, angrier. My vision started to blur around the edges, and for a moment the forest around me seemed to shift and change. The trees looked different, older some, how? More twisted. Shadows moved where no shadows should be. I fumbled for my radio with shaking hands. "Base, this is Ranger Strongwater. I've found the archaeological site. The team is missing, and the burial mounds have been disturbed. I need backup out here." Static answered me. Then, cutting through the white noise, a voice that wasn't quite human. "No one comes to help the grave robbers." The radio went dead. I tried my cell phone, but of course there was no signal this deep in the forest. The headache was getting worse, and the voices were multiplying. Men, women, children, all speaking Cherokee, all sounding angry and betrayed. That's when I saw the footprints. They were in the soft earth around the burial mounds, clear as day. Human feet, but impossibly large, nearly 20 inches long and proportionally wide. The impressions were so deep they'd punched through the leaf litter into the clay beneath. Whatever made them had to weigh at least 800 pounds. I knelt down to examine them more closely, fighting through the pain in my head. The prints showed 5 toes, just like a human's, but with what looked like claw marks at the tips. They led away from the destroyed mounds and into the deeper forest. As I crouched there, studying the tracks, I felt something watching me. The sensation was so strong I could almost feel eyes boring into the back of my skull. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. "He sees the signs but does not understand," one of the voices whispered in my mind. "The guardians wake when the sacred ground bleeds." I stood up too fast and nearly fell over as another wave of pain crashed through my head. When my vision cleared, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Dr. Webb's field notebook was nailed to a tree about 10 feet away. Not thumbtacked or taped, nailed. 3 rusty railroad spikes, impasse, had been driven through it into the bark. I was certain it hadn't been there a minute ago. With trembling hands, I pulled the notebook free. The pages were filled with Webb's neat handwriting, documenting his team's progress. But the last entry, written in what looked like blood, was in Cherokee. Even with my limited knowledge of the language, I could translate it. "We have awakened what should sleep. The guardians come for us. God help us all." I should have left right then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of those woods and never come back. But I'm a ranger, and somewhere out there, Dr. Webb's team might still be alive. I couldn't abandon them, even if everything about this situation felt wrong in ways I couldn't begin to explain. I followed the massive footprints deeper into the forest. The trail led away from the burial site, winding between ancient trees that seemed to lean in closer with every step. The voices in my head had quieted to a whisper, but they never completely stopped. It was like having a radio tuned to a distant station. I could almost make out words, fragments of meaning that danced just beyond my understanding. The trees here were older than anything I'd seen before, their trunks so massive that 5 men holding hands couldn't have circled them. Moss hung from their branches like funeral shrouds, and the air smelled of decay and old earth. Somewhere in the canopy above, branches creaked and groaned, though I couldn't feel any wind. I'd been following the trail for about an hour when I found the first body. Dr. Sarah White was the team's forensic anthropologist, a small woman in her 30s who'd impressed me with her knowledge of Cherokee burial customs when I'd first met the team. Now she was curled up at the base of a massive hemlock, and for a moment I thought she was just sleeping. Then I saw her eyes. They were wide open, staring at nothing, pupils so dilated they looked like black holes. But she was breathing. Shallow, rapid breaths like she was running a marathon in her sleep. Dr. White knelt beside her, checking for injuries. No broken bones, no blood, no obvious trauma. But when I gently shook her shoulder, she didn't respond at all. It was like her mind had just left. That's when she started talking. "So beautiful," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The colors. I can see forever. All the way back to the beginning. The first people. The ones who made the pact." "Dr. White, it's Ranger Strongwater. Can you hear me? What happened to your team?" Her head turned toward me with mechanical precision, but her eyes didn't track. She was looking through me, seeing something I couldn't see. "The Guardian showed me," she said. 500 years of memory, all at once. Every generation that kept the promise. Every person who honored the sacred ground, and then us. Her voice broke. What we did to them. What we took. I tried to help her sit up, but she was completely limp, like her muscles had forgotten how to work. The voices in my head were getting louder again, and I was starting to understand why. Something had gotten into Dr. White's mind, just like something was trying to get into mine. The difference was, I was fighting it. "Where are the others?" I asked. She smiled then, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. The Guardian took them to see, to understand. Dr. Webb laughed when it first spoke to him, said it was impossible, that Sasquatch was just folklore. Her laugh was like breaking glass. He's not laughing anymore. The smell hit me then, something like wet fur and old leather, but underneath it, something else, something wild and ancient and completely alien. I spun around, scanning the forest, and caught a glimpse of movement between the trees. It was there and gone in an instant, but what I saw made my knees go weak. A massive shape, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur. But it wasn't the size that scared me. It was the intelligence in its eyes. Human intelligence, but magnified somehow. Deeper. "You have Cherokee blood," a voice said in my head, clearer than any of the others. "Your grandmother's grandmother knew our names. But do you?" I tried to speak, but my mouth had gone completely dry. Dr. White was still talking beside me, rambling about colors and memories that weren't her own. The thing in the trees was gone, but I could feel it watching, judging. "Your people violated the sacred ground, stole the bones of medicine men who died protecting this place. What price should be paid for such disrespect?" Images flashed through my mind that weren't my memories. Cherokee warriors making a pact with massive, fur-covered beings. Promises to protect certain places to keep them secret from the white man's world. Generations of guardianship that had lasted right up until Dr. Webb's team arrived with their permits and their equipment. "I didn't know," I whispered. "We thought it was just archaeology." "Ignorance is not innocence," the voice replied. "But you carry the old blood. You might yet earn the right to leave this place alive." The forest around me began to change. The trees seemed to grow taller, the shadows deeper. I could see figures moving between the trunks, not human figures, but something else. Something that had been here long before my people ever crossed the land bridge from Asia. Dr. White's hand grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Her fingernails were bleeding, I noticed. When I looked closer, I saw she'd been clawing at her own scalp. "It's in my head," she whispered. "All of it. Every memory, every death, every broken promise. I can't make it stop." That's when I understood what was happening. This wasn't just about protecting sacred ground. This was about justice. Cherokee justice, administered by beings that had been enforcing it for longer than recorded history. And I was next. The Guardian came for me at sunset. I'd been trying to help Dr. White, to get her on her feet and moving toward the trail, but she was completely gone. Whatever the thing had done to her mind, there was no coming back from it. She kept talking about seeing through time, about understanding the grand design that connected all living things. It would have been beautiful if it wasn't so completely terrifying. Then the temperature dropped about 20 degrees in the space of a heartbeat, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. It stepped out from behind a tree that couldn't possibly have hidden something so large. 8.5 feet tall, maybe 9, covered in dark brown fur that looked like it had never been touched by sunlight. But it was the eyes that made my breath catch. They were human eyes, but ancient beyond measure. Looking into them was like staring into the bottom of a deep well. "William Strongwater," it said, without moving its mouth. The voice filled my head completely, drowning out even my own thoughts. "Son of Margaret, grandson of Mary Walking Bear. Your great-great-grandmother spoke our true names. Do you remember them?" I did somehow. The names came flooding back from childhood stories I'd thought were just fairy tales. "Kituwa," I whispered. "The ancient ones, the protectors." "Good. You carry more than Cherokee blood. You carry Cherokee memory. That may save your life." The creature moved closer, and I forced myself not to run. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to flee, but I knew I wouldn't get 10 feet. This thing could probably outrun a horse. "Your people disturbed the resting place of Aganunitsi," it continued. "A medicine man who died defending this forest from Spanish conquistadors. His bones contained power your friends sought to steal and study." "They didn't know," I said. "Dr. Webb's team, they thought they were just doing research. They had permits. Permits from whom?" The Guardian's mental voice carried a bitter laugh. "From a government that has never honored a single treaty with your people? That has spent 2 centuries trying to erase Cherokee culture? You think their permits carry weight in this place?" I couldn't argue with that logic. The forest around us had grown darker, and I could see other shapes moving in the shadows. More guardians, or maybe the spirits of the dead themselves. Dr. White had gone completely silent beside me, but her eyes were tracking things I couldn't see. "The archaeologists took sacred artifacts," the Guardian continued. "Bones, pottery, medicine bundles that were meant to rest in darkness forever. They photographed them, cataloged them, prepared to ship them to a museum where tourists could gawk at Cherokee spirituality like it was a curiosity." The anger in its mental voice was like standing too close to a bonfire. I could feel it burning through my consciousness, and suddenly I was seeing through the Guardian's eyes. I saw Dr. Webb's team arriving, setting up their equipment, discussing the burial mounds like they were just another archaeological site. I felt the fury of the Guardians as they watched sacred ground being violated, and I saw what happened next. The Guardians hadn't killed the team. Not exactly. They'd shared their memories with them, forced them to experience 500 years of Cherokee history in the space of minutes. Every broken treaty, every forced relocation, every sacred site destroyed in the name of progress. The human mind wasn't built to process that much trauma all at once. Dr. Webb had lasted longest. He'd tried to run when he realized what was happening, but you can't outrun something that exists partially in your own mind. The Guardians had caught him about a mile from the burial site and shown him the true cost of what he'd done. "Do you understand now?" the Guardian asked me. "This is not murder. This is education. Your friends are learning what it means to have your sacred places desecrated." "But they'll die," I said. "Their minds can't handle it." "Perhaps, or perhaps they will learn to carry the waves, art of true knowledge, as we do, as you must." The Guardian's huge hand reached toward my forehead, and I knew that if it touched me, my mind would be flooded with the same overwhelming memories that had broken Dr. White. I'd see every atrocity committed against my people, feel every grief and rage as if it were my own. I might survive it. I had Cherokee blood, Cherokee memories already in my mind, but I might not. And even if I did, I'd never be the same. "Wait," I said. There has to be another way. I can make this right. I can ensure the artifacts are returned, the burial sites restored. I can make sure this never happens again. The Guardian paused, its hand inches from my face. You would become the keeper of this place? Guard it as we do? Feel the pain of every violation as if it were your own? Yes, I said, and meant it. It's what my grandmother would have wanted, what my ancestors would have demanded. For a long moment, the Guardian stared at me with those ancient, terrible eyes. Then, slowly, it lowered its hand. Show me, it said. That was 3 months ago. I'm writing this report from my cabin on the edge of Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest, though I know I'll never file it. How could I? Who would believe that Sasquatch is real, that they're the guardians of Cherokee sacred sites, that they can reach into your mind and share memories that go back centuries? Instead, I filed a different report. Hiking accident in rough terrain. Dr. Webb's team had been inadequately prepared for the backcountry conditions. A flash flood had swept them away before they could call for help. Their bodies were never recovered, which isn't unusual in that part of the forest. Dr. White is in a psychiatric facility in Knoxville. She keeps talking about colors that don't exist and memories that aren't hers. Her family thinks it was some kind of breakdown brought on by isolation and stress. The doctors are calling it a severe dissociative episode. She's getting better, slowly, but she'll never be the person she was before the Guardians showed her the true weight of history. As for me, I kept my promise. I spent 2 weeks returning the artifacts to their proper resting places, performing the cleansing rituals my grandmother had taught me. The Guardians watched but didn't interfere. When I was finished, they shared with me just a fraction of what they'd shown the archaeological team. Enough to understand my responsibilities, not enough to drive me insane. Now I patrol the deep forest with new purpose. Officially, I'm still just a ranger, but I carry a heavier burden now. I can sense when people approach the sacred sites with wrong intentions. I can feel the anger of the Guardians when Cherokee burial grounds are threatened. And sometimes, late at night, I can hear their voices in my mind. They're not monsters, these ancient protectors. They're what my people became when we learned that the only way to preserve something sacred is to be willing to die for it, or kill for it, when necessary. The voices tell me there are other sacred sites throughout the southeastern mountains. Other Guardians keeping watch. They've been protecting Cherokee heritage for 500 years, and they'll keep protecting it for 500 more. And now, I'm part of that protection. I still do my regular ranger duties, help lost hikers, monitor wildlife, maintain trails. But I also do things that aren't in any job description. I redirect researchers who get too interested in certain areas. I make sure permits for archaeological work in sensitive sites get mysteriously delayed or denied. I watch for people who might disturb what should stay buried. Sometimes I wonder if I'm becoming more guardian than human. The voices in my head are clearer now, and I find myself understanding Cherokee words I was never taught. My grandmother's stories make more sense every day. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the deepest parts of the forest, I catch glimpses of the ancient ones moving between the trees. They nod to me now when they see me. Recognition, acceptance, respect. I know I'll never leave these mountains. How could I? This is where my real work is, protecting what remains of my people's sacred places. The outside world thinks Cherokee heritage lives in museums and tourist attractions. They're wrong. It lives in the deep forest, in the shadows between the ancient trees, guarded by beings that remember when the world was young. And now I help them remember. My name is William Strongwater, and I am a guardian of Cherokee sacred ground. The archaeological team that came to study our burial mounds learned that some knowledge comes with a price. They paid it with their sanity. I paid it with my humanity, but some things are worth any price to protect. The voices tell me Dr. Webb's family is planning a memorial expedition next spring. They want to see where he died, to honor his memory. I'll have to discourage them, of course. The deep forest isn't safe for people who don't understand what they're walking into. The Guardians don't distinguish between good intentions and bad ones when it comes to sacred ground. They never have. They never will. My name is Catherine Ironwood, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a ranger at Denali National Park for 12 years now, and I've seen things that would make city folks pack up and never come back. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened during the winter of 1973. I'm what they call a high-altitude rescue specialist. Sounds fancy, but it just means I'm the one they call when climbers get themselves into trouble on Mount McKinley. At 35, I've pulled more frozen bodies off that mountain than I care to count. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old days, back when our people knew to stay away from the high places during the long dark. She called them pale crawlers, things that hunted when the sun disappeared for months. I always thought those were just stories to keep kids from wandering off. The base camp sits at 14,000 feet, where the air gets thin and every breath feels like work. 200 miles from the nearest town, and when winter hits, you might as well be on the moon. The wind can hit 100 miles per hour, and temperatures drop to 80 below. That's cold enough to freeze your spit before it hits the ground. It was November when the call came in. 8 climbers from some college expedition had been missing for 3 weeks. Their last radio contact said they were making good time up the mountain, planning to set up camp at 16,000 feet. Then nothing. Radio silence for 21 days. My supervisor, Bill Morrison, handed me the file with a grim look. Probably found them scattered across 3 different valleys by now, he said. Weather's been hell up there. I suited up anyway. It's what we do. Even when hope is thin as the mountain air, we go look. The families deserve to know. The helicopter dropped me as close as it could get before the wind made flying impossible. I'd be on my own for at least 4 days, maybe more if the weather turned worse. My pack carried enough food for a week, plus all the gear needed for high-altitude rescue work. Ropes, ice axes, emergency shelter, medical supplies, and a radio that worked about half the time. The first thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. Not normal quiet, wrong quiet. Usually you hear wind whistling through the rocks, ice creaking as it shifts, maybe the distant rumble of an avalanche. But this was dead silence, like the mountain was holding its breath. I followed the route the climbers should have taken, looking for any sign of their passage. The snow up here gets blown around so much that tracks disappear fast, but experienced climbers leave other signs. Rope marks on rocks, gear caches, places where they chipped ice for water. 3 hours in, I found their first camp, or what was left of it. The tent was still standing, which was weird. Wind like we'd been having should have shredded it weeks ago. But there it was, perfectly intact, stakes still in the ground. When I unzipped the door, everything inside was arranged neat as a pin. Sleeping bags folded, cooking gear stacked in perfect piles, food sorted by type. No climber in history had ever kept a camp that organized. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Ironwood. Found the first campsite. Something's not right here." Static crackled back. "Copy that, Kate. What's your situation?" "Camp's intact but empty. Gear is..." I paused, trying to find words that wouldn't sound crazy. "Gear is arranged like someone went through it real careful, like they were looking for something specific. Weather damage?" I looked around the tent again. Every piece of equipment sorted by size and function. Canned food in one pile, dried goods in another. Even their dirty clothes were folded. Negative on weather damage. This was done by hand. The radio crackled with static. I tried calling again, but the signal was getting weaker. Mountains do that. Block communications when you need them most. I spent another hour at the camp looking for clues. Found a journal belonging to someone named Marcus Chen. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago. Day 5, made good time to 14,500 feet. Weather holding. Jennifer thinks she heard something moving around the camp last night, but probably just wind. Planning to push for 16K tomorrow if conditions stay stable. Nothing unusual there. But when I flipped back through earlier entries, I found something that made my skin crawl. Day 3. Weird echo effects up here. When we talk, sometimes it sounds like something's talking back. Kevin says it's just sound bouncing off the ice walls, but the timing is off. Like something's listening first, then copying us. I stuffed the journal in my pack and kept moving. The trail up to their second camp was harder to follow, but I found signs. Boot prints in sheltered areas where snow hadn't blown away. A dropped energy bar wrapper. Small things, but enough to track. The wind picked up as afternoon faded into evening. I needed to find shelter soon, or risk getting caught in the open when full dark hit. At this latitude in November, darkness lasts almost 20 hours. You don't want to be moving around blind at 14,000 feet. I found a good spot between two large rocks and set up my emergency shelter. Just a small tent, but rated for extreme conditions. As I worked, I kept thinking about that organized camp and the journal entries about echoes. When the sun finally disappeared, the cold really hit. Even in my shelter with a good sleeping bag, I could feel the temperature dropping fast. I heated some soup on my camp stove and tried the radio again. Nothing but static. That's when I heard it for the first time. A clicking sound, like someone tapping two pieces of ice together. It came from somewhere uphill, carried on the wind. I listened hard, but it didn't repeat. Probably just ice shifting. The mountain makes all kinds of sounds when it gets this cold. But as I lay in my sleeping bag, trying to get warm enough to sleep, I heard it again. Click, click, click. 3 sharp sounds, evenly spaced. Then an answer from somewhere else on the mountain. Click, click, click. Same pattern, same timing. Ice doesn't echo itself. I woke up to absolute silence. Not even wind. In 12 years on this mountain, I'd never heard it completely quiet. There's always something. Air moving through rocks, snow settling, the mountain creaking as it shifts. This was like being inside a tomb. I checked my watch. 6 a.m., but it might as well have been midnight. Won't see real sunlight for another month and a half. I heated coffee and tried the radio while I broke camp. Base, this is Ironwood, day 2, heading for second campsite. Static answered me. The route got steeper as I climbed. I followed the ridge line, stopping every few hundred yards to check for signs of the missing climbers. Found a few, a piece of rope tied around a rock anchor, some scratches in the ice where they'd used their axes. But I also found things that didn't make sense. Scratch marks in the ice that were too deep, too wide to be made by climbing gear. They looked almost like claw marks, but what kind of animal could survive up here? And they were everywhere, on vertical rock faces, on overhangs that nothing should be able to reach. The second camp was supposed to be at 15,800 feet, tucked into a sheltered area below a small glacier. I found it just after noon, or what passed for noon in the endless twilight. This one was destroyed. The tent was shredded, but not by wind. The cuts were too clean, too purposeful. Sleeping bags had been torn open and the contents scattered. But again, everything was sorted. Gear piled by type. Food organized by size. And there was blood. Not much. Just dark stains in the snow around where the tent used to be. But blood doesn't last long at these temperatures unless it's fresh, which meant whatever happened here was recent. I found another journal, this one belonging to Jennifer Walsh. The woo entries got more disturbing as I read. Day 8. Marcus is missing. He went to check the gear cache this morning and never came back. We searched for 3 hours but found nothing. Kevin thinks he fell into a crevasse, but there are no crevasses near the cache, just solid rock. Day 9. Found Marcus's gear arranged in a perfect circle about a quarter mile from camp. His ice axe, his pack, even his gloves. All laid out like someone was making a display. But no sign of Marcus himself. Day 10. Something moved past our tent last night. Something big. Left tracks in the snow that look almost human, but wrong. The stride is too long and the feet are different. Kevin tried to follow them this morning, but they disappear on the rock faces. Nothing can climb straight up a vertical wall. Day 11. Kevin's gone now too. Disappeared sometime during the night. His sleeping bag was empty this morning, but there's no way he could have left the tent without waking the rest of us. The zipper was still closed from the inside. My hands were shaking as I read, and not just from the cold. Day 12. Only 4 of us left. Sarah, Tom, David, and me. We're moving up to the next camp today. Can't stay here anymore. Keep hearing those clicking sounds at night, getting closer. They sound like they're talking to each other. I flipped to the last entry. Day 13. They took Sarah right out of her sleeping bag. I was lying next to her and never felt anything. Just woke up and she was gone. The bag was still warm. We're not climbers anymore. We're prey. The journal ended there. I stuffed it in my pack next to the first one and tried to think rationally. People go missing on mountains all the time. Weather, avalanches, falls. There are 100 ways to die up here. But the details were wrong. The organized gear, the impossible tracks, the way people were vanishing without a trace. And that beak geese, Lude was definitely fresh. I needed to find the third campsite, see if any of the climbers were still alive. According to their route plan, they should have been heading for 17,000 feet, up near the summit ridge. The climb got harder as the afternoon wore on. The slope turned into almost vertical ice, requiring careful use of my axes and crampons. Progress was slow, but I was making good time when I heard it again. Click, click, click. This time it was close, maybe 50 yards uphill from me. I stopped climbing and listened hard. The sound came again, and then an answer from somewhere behind me. Click, click, click. Click, click, click. They were on both sides of me. I keyed my radio, trying to keep my voice steady. Base, this is Ironwood. I need immediate backup at coordinates. Static. Dead static. The clicking sounds were getting closer now, and there were more of them. Not just 2 sources, maybe 4 or 5 all around me. I was surrounded. I couldn't see anything in the dim twilight, but I could hear movement. Soft scratching sounds like something with claws moving across ice, getting closer. I unslung my ice axe and tried to spot whatever was making the noise. The sounds seemed to be coming from above me now, from impossible angles on the rock face. That's when I saw the first one, just a glimpse in my headlamp beam as it swept across the cliff above me. Something pale moving against the dark rock, human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms that seemed too long for its body. It was climbing straight down the vertical wall like it was walking on flat ground. My light hit it full on for maybe 2 seconds, long enough to see that it had no eyes, just smooth, pale skin where eyes should be. And when my light touched it, it opened its mouth and made that clicking sound. But now I could see what was making the noise. Rows and rows of sharp teeth, clicking together like castanets. The thing disappeared into a crack in the rock before I could get a better look. But the clicking sounds were all around me now, echoing off the mountain. Walls. More of them. Getting closer. I started climbing faster than was safe, scrambling up the ice face with my heart hammering. Behind me I could hear them following. Not just one now, several of them, moving with impossible speed across terrain that should have killed anything trying to climb it. I reached a small ledge and pressed my back against the rock wall, ice axe ready. My headlamp beam swept back and forth, trying to spot them before they got too close. The clicking stopped. Everything went dead silent again. I waited, breathing hard, listening for any sound of movement. Nothing. Just the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Then I saw them. 3 of them, standing on a ledge about 30 feet away. Pale, eyeless, perfectly still. Watching me, even though they had no eyes. They looked almost human, but stretched out like someone had pulled them on a rack. Their skin was white as fresh snow, and they didn't seem bothered by the cold at all. One of them tilted its head, listening. Then it opened its mouth and clicked once. The other 2 answered. Click, click, and from somewhere behind me more clicking sounds. I spun around and saw 2 more of them on the rock face above me, hanging upside down like spiders. 5 of them total, all staring at me with their eyeless faces. I don't remember making the decision to run. 1 second I was frozen in terror, the next I was scrambling up the mountain as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, the clicking sound started up again, but faster now. Excited. They were hunting. I climbed in pure panic for maybe 10 minutes before exhaustion forced me to slow down. At this altitude, you can't maintain that pace for long without your lungs giving out. I found another ledge and collapsed against the rock, gasping for air. The clicking sounds had stopped again. But I knew they were still out there, still following. I could feel them watching me. My radio crackled with static. I tried calling for help again, but got nothing back except dead air. I was completely on my own. I forced myself to think clearly. These things, whatever they were, seemed to hunt using sound. Those clicking noises were probably how they communicated, maybe even how they located prey in the darkness. They moved like they knew the mountain better than any human ever could. But they hadn't attacked me directly. They were following, surrounding me, but not moving in for the kill, which meant they were either waiting for something or they had a plan. Neither option was comforting. I needed to reach that third campsite. If any of the climbers were still alive, they might have answers, or at least safety in numbers. The route to 17,000 feet followed a narrow ridge with steep drops on both sides, dangerous in good conditions, potentially deadly in the dark. But it was the only way up, and staying put wasn't an option. I started climbing again, moving carefully this time. Every few minutes I'd stop and listen, but heard nothing except wind whistling through the rocks. Maybe I'd lost them. Maybe they'd given up. Then I found Jenkins. He was sitting against a rock outcrop about halfway to the third camp, perfectly upright like he was just taking a rest. At first I thought he was dead. Nobody sits still that long at this temperature without freezing solid. But when my headlamp hit him, he turned his head toward me. "Thank God," I called out, hurrying over to him. "Are you hurt? How long have you been here?" He didn't answer right away. Just stared at me with eyes that seemed too pale in my light. His skin had an odd color to it, almost white. Frostbite, probably. "Jenkins?" I knelt down next to him. "Can you hear me?" "Yes," he said finally. His voice sounded strange, hollow. "I can hear you." I pulled out my emergency medical kit. "We need to get you warmed up and check for injuries. Where are the others?" "Gone." He was still staring at me with those pale eyes. "All gone." "Dead?" "Changed." He tilted his head, listening to something I couldn't hear. "They're coming back soon." That's when I noticed his hands. The fingernails were gone, replaced by what looked like small claws. And his skin wasn't just pale from frostbite, it was actually white. Snow white. "Jenkins, we need to move. Can you stand?" He stood up smoothly, too smoothly for someone who'd been sitting in sub-zero temperatures. "We should wait for them." "Wait for who?" "The others." He pointed into the darkness above us. "They'll be here soon." That's when I heard the clicking sounds again, coming from multiple directions, getting closer. Jenkins smiled when he heard them, showing teeth that looked too sharp. There they are now. I backed away from him slowly. Whatever had happened to the missing climbers, Jenkins was part of it now. He wasn't human anymore, or at least not completely human. "Stay back," I warned, raising my ice axe. He laughed, a sound like ice breaking. "You can't run from them. They know these mountains better than you ever will. They've been here longer than your grandmother's grandmother." The pale things appeared on the rocks around us, more than before, maybe 15 or 20 of them, moving with that same impossible grace across vertical surfaces. They arranged themselves in a rough circle, cutting off all escape routes. But they weren't looking at me. They were looking at Jenkins. He clicked his tongue once, and they all clicked back in unison. Some kind of communication I couldn't understand. Then Jenkins turned back to me. "They want to know if you're ready." "Ready for what?" "To change." He took a step closer. "It doesn't hurt. You just get cold, and then you get warm, and then you're one of them. One of us." I swung the ice axe at him, but he moved faster than anything human should be able to move. The blade passed right through empty air. He was behind, and me now, somehow. "The cold is the first part," he whispered in my ear. "Then comes the hunger." I spun around and swung again, but he danced away laughing. The pale things were clicking excitedly now, like they were enjoying the show. I ran, up the ridge, scrambling over loose rock and patches of ice, not caring about the drop-offs on either side. Behind me, I could hear them following, Jenkins and all the pale things moving like a pack of wolves. But they weren't trying to catch me. They were hurting me. Every time I tried to veer left or right, one of them would appear to block my path. They wanted me to go up the mountain, toward the summit, toward whatever was waiting for me up there. I reached the third campsite just as my legs gave out. The camp was intact, tents still standing, but no sign of the remaining climbers. I dove into the largest tent and zipped it shut, knowing it wouldn't stop them, but needing some kind of barrier. The tent was empty except for scattered gear and more bloodstains. But there was also a radio, a bigger, more powerful unit than my handheld. I switched it on and tried to reach base. Mayday, mayday, this is Ranger Ironwood on Mount McKinley. I need immediate evacuation. Multiple casualties. Hostile. Something. Please respond. Static answered me. But then, faintly, I heard a voice. Kate? Kate? Is that you? It was Bill Morrison from base camp. I nearly cried with relief. Bill! Thank God, I need emergency backup immediately. The missing climbers are dead or changed somehow. There's something up here, something that's been hunting them. Kate, you're breaking up. Say again? I said there's something hunting up here. Send a helicopter as soon as... The radio went dead. I tried switching it back on, but nothing happened. The battery was fine, all the connections looked good. It just wouldn't work. That's when I heard Jenkins's voice outside the tent. She's in there. Can you smell her? More clicking sounds. Lots of them. They'd surrounded the camp. Come out, Kate, Jenkins called. Meet the family, I grabbed on. Everything useful I could find. Rope, emergency flares, a spare ice axe, and cut a hole in the back of the tent with my knife. I crawled out and found myself face to face with one of the pale things. It was hanging upside down from an ice overhang, its eyeless face inches from mine. This close, I could see that its skin wasn't just white. It was translucent. I could see dark veins underneath, and something else. Something moving. The thing opened its mouth and clicked softly, almost gently. Its breath smelled like frozen meat. I lit an emergency flare and shoved it right into its face. The thing recoiled with a shriek that sounded like breaking glass. The light seemed to hurt it, or at least confuse it. I scrambled away from the tent and up toward the summit ridge, using the flare to keep them back. They followed but kept their distance, clicking angrily in the darkness. The flare wouldn't last long. Maybe 10 minutes of bright light, then I'd be back in the dark with them. I had to find shelter. Somewhere I could defend, somewhere with walls they couldn't climb. That's when I remembered the ice caves. The ice caves were about a quarter-mile up from the third camp, carved into the mountain by wind and geological forces over thousands of years. I'd used them for shelter before during bad weather. They were deep, with only one entrance, and the walls were too smooth for anything to climb. I made it to the caves with my flare still burning, the pale things following at a distance. They seemed reluctant to get too close to the light, but they weren't giving up the chase either. The cave entrance was narrow, just wide enough for one person. I squeezed through and found myself in a larger chamber about the size of a small room. The walls were solid ice, polished smooth by wind. There was only one way in or out, perfect for defense, or a perfect trap. I lit a second flare and sat on, tuck it in a crack in the wall. The red light reflected off the ice, making everything look like the inside of a giant ruby. I could hear the pale things outside, clicking and scratching at the entrance. That's when I found the bones, human bones, scattered around the floor of the cave. Lots of them. Some looked old, weathered by time. Others looked fresh. And arranged among them were pieces of climbing gear, ropes, axes, crampons. Equipment I recognized. This wasn't just a shelter. It was their feeding ground. I heard Jenkins's voice from the cave entrance. You can't stay in there forever, Kate. The flares will burn out, and then we'll come in and get you. What happened to you? I called back. What are those things? They're hunters. They've been hunting these mountains since before your people came here, before anyone came here. His voice sounded different now, less human, more like the clicking sounds the pale things made. They need food to survive the long winter. Usually they just take a few climbers here and there, but this year is different. Different how? This year they're building a colony. They need more than just food. They need converts. I understood then. The missing climbers hadn't all been eaten. Some of them had been changed, turned into things like Jenkins, pale, eyeless hunters that could survive in conditions that would kill a normal human. The process is simple, Jenkins continued. They bite you, inject something into your bloodstream, a kind of parasite that changes your body from the inside, makes you stronger, faster, makes you able to hunt with them. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand. This isn't death, it's evolution. I checked my remaining supplies. 2 more flares, plus the one burning on the wall. Maybe 20 minutes of light total. After that, I'd be fighting them in complete darkness, the Eski. Ratching sounds at the cave entrance were getting louder. They were trying to dig their way in, claws scraping against ice and rock. I had an idea. Probably a stupid idea, but it was better than waiting to die. The caves went deeper into the mountain, a network of passages that connected to other chambers. I'd explored some of them before, back when I was younger and stupider. Most led nowhere, but one of them connected to a passage that opened onto the north face of the mountain. If I could reach that exit, I might be able to get away from them, or at least lead them away from the main climbing routes where other people might be in danger. I grabbed my gear and headed deeper into the cave system, using my second flare for light. Behind me, I heard the pale things finally break through the entrance. Their clicking sounds echoed off the ice walls, distorted and multiplied until it sounded like a whole army of them. The passages were narrow and twisting, carved by water and wind over centuries. I crawled through sections barely wide enough for my body, then climbed down into larger chambers filled with ice formations like frozen waterfalls. And everywhere I went, I found more bones, more evidence that this place had been used as a hunting ground for a very long time. The pale things were following me through the passages, moving with that same impossible grace even in tight spaces. I could hear them clicking to each other, coordinating their movements. They knew these caves better than I did. My second flare was burning low when I reached the chamber with the north face exit. The opening was about 6 feet off the ground, just a crack in the ice wall that led to the outside. I could feel cold air flowing through it. I climbed up toward the exit, but before I could reach it, Jenkins appeared in the passage behind me. "End of the line, Kate." He looked even less human now. His skin was completely white, and his eyes had turned pale as clouded ice. When he opened his mouth, I could see that his teeth had changed too, sharper, more like fangs. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, climbing toward me with movements that were too fluid, too quick. "The change isn't painful, and when it's over you'll understand. You'll see how much better this is." I lit my last flare and swung it at him. He hissed and backed away, but not far. The narrow passage didn't give me much room to maneuver. "The light won't last forever," he said. He was right. This flare was already burning lower than the others, maybe 5 minutes left, probably less. That's when I heard something that made my blood freeze. More clicking sounds, but not from behind me. From above. I looked up and saw them crawling across the ceiling of the chamber like spiders, dozens of them, all hanging upside down, all staring at me with their eyeless faces. I was surrounded. Jenkins smiled, showing those sharp teeth. "Welcome to the family." The flare flickered and went out. In the darkness, I heard them moving. Claws on ice, soft breathing, the rustle of movement from all directions. They were closing in. But I still had one trick left. I'd been saving it, hoping I wouldn't need it. But now, in complete darkness with pale hunters surrounding me, it was my only chance. I pulled the pin on my emergency beacon and threw it as hard as I could toward the exit crack. The device hit the ice wall and bounced through the opening, falling down the north face of the mountain. But not before it sent out its signal. The beacon was designed for search and rescue operations. When activated, It sent out a powerful radio pulse that could be detected by aircraft from hundreds of miles away. But it also did something else. It emitted a high-frequency sound pulse, a sonar ping designed to help rescuers locate victims in avalanche debris. The pale things reacted to the sound like I'd hit them with a physical blow. They shrieked and scattered, clawing at their heads. The high-frequency pulse seemed to interfere with whatever senses they used to navigate in the dark. Jenkins screamed too, a sound that was more animal than human. He stumbled backward, giving me just enough room to squeeze through the exit crack. I fell about 10 feet down the north face before catching myself on a ledge. Above me, I could still hear them shrieking in pain and confusion. The beacon would only pulse for a few minutes before the battery died, but it might be enough. I started climbing down the mountain in complete darkness, feeling my way from handhold to handhold. It was insanely dangerous. One slip would send me tumbling thousands of feet down the north face. But staying in those caves with the pale things would have been suicide. Behind me, the shrieking gradually stopped. They were adapting to the sound, or the beacon was dying. Either way, they'd be coming after me soon. I had to reach the bottom of this face and get to the emergency shelter I'd cached there 2 years ago. If it was still intact, it had supplies I could use to survive until rescue arrived, if rescue was coming at all. I made it down the north face just as dawn broke. Not real dawn, just a slight lightening of the darkness that passed for daylight this time of year. My emergency cache was still there, hidden under a pile of rocks where I'd left it. The shelter was a small but well-supplied snow cave with enough food and fuel for a week. More importantly, it had a working radio. "Base, this is Ironwood. Emergency evacuation required immediately." Bill Morrison's voice came back strong and clear. "Kate, where the hell have you been? We lost contact 2 days ago. Mount McKinley North Face, coordinates?" I gave him my position. "I need immediate pickup. All 8 climbers are dead or missing. Weather's been too rough for helicopter operations. Earliest we can get to you is maybe tomorrow if the wind dies down." I looked up at the mountain above me. In the dim light, I could see movement on the ice faces. Pale shapes moving like spiders across terrain no human could climb. "Bill, listen careful. I don't send anyone else up here. Not until I've had a chance to debrief. There's something on this mountain that's been hunting the climbers. Kate, you've been up there for 3 days in extreme conditions. Altitude sickness can cause—" "I'm not hallucinating," I interrupted. Just don't send anyone else up here until I get back. Promise me." There was a long pause. "Okay, Kate, just hang tight. We'll have you out of there as soon as possible." The evacuation didn't come until 2 days later. By then, I'd had plenty of time to think about what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. Part of me wondered if Bill was right, if extreme altitude and stress had caused some kind of break from reality. But I still had the climbers' journals. I still had the memories of those pale, eyeless faces. And when the helicopter came to pick me up, I made sure to scan the mountain one last time. They were still up there. I could see them moving in the shadows, watching the helicopter with their eyeless faces. The official report blamed the deaths on severe weather and altitude sickness. 8 experienced climbers had gotten caught in a storm and died of exposure. It happens more often than people think. The mountain is dangerous, and even experts make fatal mistakes. I didn't argue with the official findings. Who would believe the truth? But I requested a transfer to a different park, somewhere warmer, lower, with fewer places for pale things to hide. My supervisor approved it without question. Losing an entire climbing expedition had shaken everyone up. I should have left it at that, should have moved on, tried to forget what I'd seen up there. But 3 months later, I started getting reports from other parks. Climbers disappearing in impossible weather. Rescue teams finding campsites that had been organized and sorted by unseen hands. Strange clicking sounds heard on mountain peaks across Alaska. The pale things weren't just on Mount McKinley. They were spreading. And 6 months after my encounter, I started noticing changes in myself. Small things at first. I didn't get cold as easily as I used to. My night vision seemed better. I could hear sounds that other people missed. Sometimes, late at night when the temperature drops, I catch myself listening for something. A sound I know I've heard before but can't quite remember. Click, click, click. And sometimes, God help me, I find myself wanting to click back. The doctors say I'm fine. Blood tests normal, no signs of infection or parasites. But they don't know what to look for. They don't know about the pale things that live in the high places, the ones that hunt when the sun disappears. They don't know that some things you catch can't be detected by normal medicine. I keep telling myself I'm imagining the changes. That the cold tolerance and enhanced hearing are just normal adaptations to spending so much time outdoors. That the dreams about climbing impossible ice walls are just stress reactions to trauma. But last week, I looked in the mirror and noticed that my eyes seemed lighter than usual. Still brown, but paler. And yesterday, when I smiled at a coworker, she took a step back and asked if I was feeling all right. "Your teeth," she said, "they look different." I haven't looked in a mirror since then. I'm afraid of what I might see. The pale things are patient. They've been hunting these mountains for longer than human memory. They can wait as long as it takes for their changes to take hold. And when the change is complete, when I finally become what they tried to make me, I'll go back to the mountain, back to help them hunt, unless I can find a way to stop it first. But the cold feels so good now. And the dreams of climbing vertical walls in the darkness are starting to feel less like nightmares and more like memories. Click, click, click. My name is Joseph Nighthawk, but everyone calls me Joe. I've been a ranger at Big Cypress National Preserve for 20 years now. That's a long time to spend in the swamp, and I've seen things that would make city folks run, screaming back to their safe little houses. But what happened in 1981 still keeps me awake at night. I'm Seminole, born and raised on the reservation just outside the preserve. My grandfather taught me the old ways, how to read the swamp, how to move through water without making a sound, how to know when something's watching you. He also told me stories about things that lived deep in the black water, things that shouldn't exist. I always figured they were just tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the cypress. The preserve is huge, 729,000 acres of wetlands that stretch as far as you can see. Most of it nobody ever visits. Too dangerous, too remote. You need an airboat just to get to the deep parts, and even then you better know what you're doing. One wrong turn and you're lost forever in a maze of cypress trees and black water. People always ask me about the skunk ape. Tourists love that stuff. They want to hear scary stories about the Florida Bigfoot. I always told them the same thing. Skunk apes are just black bears that drunk fishermen see through beer goggles. Made them laugh. Made me feel smart. I wish I'd kept my mouth shut. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in August. Hot as hell, with that thick humidity that makes your clothes stick to your skin. I was sitting in the ranger station when the call came in. A research team from the university had gone missing. 6 biologists studying the Florida panther. Good people doing important work. They'd been out for 3 days in the deep swamp, staying on one of the little tree islands we call hammocks. Radio contact every 12 hours, like clockwork. Then, nothing. They're lost. Check-in was Sunday night. Everything normal, they said. Panthers were active. Good data collection. By Tuesday, their families were worried sick. The university called us, then the sheriff, then the Coast Guard. But I knew the swamp better than anyone. If they were going to be found, I'd be the one to find them. I took my airboat out that afternoon. The preserve looks peaceful from a distance. All green and quiet under the hot sun. But once you get into the deep channels, you realize how alone you really are. No cell phone signal, no roads, no way out except the way you came in. And if your boat breaks down, well, the gators and snakes don't mind the company. The research team's base camp was about 15 miles in on a hammock we called Panther Island. It's a little patch of high ground surrounded by water and cypress trees. Perfect place to study the big cats because they use it as a hunting ground. I found their boat first. It was just sitting there in the water, motor running, going in slow circles like someone had put it on autopilot. But no one was inside. Their gear was still there, cameras, notebooks, food, like they'd just stepped out for a minute and forgot to come back. That's when I started to feel it. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? The hair on your neck stands up, and you can't shake the idea that you're not alone. I've spent my whole life in these swamps, and I know every sound, every smell, every shadow. This was different. This was wrong. I tied their boat to mine and started looking around the hammock. The camp was set up neat and tidy. Tents in a row, equipment organized, fire pit with cold ashes. But something felt off. Too quiet. Even the bugs had stopped buzzing. That's when I found the first bones. At first I thought it was normal swamp stuff. Animals die out here all the time. Gators eat birds, snakes eat frogs, everything eats everything else. It's the circle of life. But these bones were different. They were arranged. Someone had taken animal skulls, raccoon, deer, a couple of big birds, and set about them up in a perfect circle around a cypress tree, not scattered like they'd fallen naturally, placed carefully like someone was trying to make a pattern. My grandfather's stories started whispering in the back of my mind. He used to talk about bone shamans, medicine men who could speak with the dead, but that was just old folklore. This had to be something else. Maybe the research team had found some kind of native burial ground. Maybe they'd disturbed something they shouldn't have. I took pictures and kept looking. The trail led deeper into the hammock where the trees grew thick and the ground got soft. More bone circles, bigger ones. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. Human bones. A skull sitting by itself on a fallen log. Clean white bone, like it had been scrubbed. And next to it, arranged in a neat line, were 6 finger bones. 6, just like the 6 missing researchers. I'm not easy to scare. 20 years in the swamp teaches you to keep your head when things get weird. But I've got to admit, my hands were shaking when I radioed back to headquarters. The signal was weak, full of static, but I got through. Base, this is Nighthawk. I found the research camp, no sign of the team, but I looked at those bones again. I'm going to need backup out here, and maybe the sheriff. The radio crackled back. Copy, Nighthawk. What's your situation? How do you explain something that doesn't make sense? I've got evidence of foul play, possible homicide. Send a boat with the crime scene kit. But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't any normal murder. Nobody kills 6 people and then arranges animal bones in perfect circles. Nobody takes the time to clean human skulls in the middle of a swamp. This was something else. Something worse. I kept searching while I waited for backup. The bone arrangements got bigger and more complex as I moved deeper into the hammock. Skulls from dozens of different animals. Some I recognized, some I didn't. All of them arranged in patterns that looked almost like writing. Like someone was trying to tell a story with death. The smell hit me around sunset. You know that rotten egg stink of sulfur? Mix that with wet dog and roadkill, and you're getting close. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I followed it to a clearing where the cypress trees formed a natural circle. In the center of the clearing was the biggest bone arrangement I'd ever seen. Human skulls, way more than 6, arranged in a spiral pattern around a pile of animal bones. And hanging from the tree branches above, like some kind of horrible Christmas ornaments, were more bones. Femurs, ribs, long bones from animals and maybe people. That's when I heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Low and deep, like a bear growling, but with something almost human in it. Something that sounded like it was trying to talk. I turned around slowly, my hand on my gun, and saw it watching me from the tree line, 9 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur, arms that hung down past its knees, and eyes that looked way too smart for any animal. It stood there for maybe 10 seconds, just staring at me. Then it stepped back into the shadows and was gone, but the smell stayed, and so did the feeling that I was being hunted. I didn't sleep that night. Backup never came. The other ranger's boat broke down 5 miles out, and by the time they got it fixed, it was too dark to navigate the channel safely. So I was stuck on Panther Island with whatever was out there in the dark. I kept my fire burning bright and my gun loaded. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like it was moving. And that smell kept drifting through the camp, reminding me that I wasn't alone. Around midnight, I heard voices. At first, I thought Backe, Cup, had finally arrived. But these weren't ranger voices. They were the missing researchers, calling for help. I heard Dr. Martinez asking for water. Jenny, the young grad student, crying for her mother. All 6 of them, somewhere out in the dark. I almost ran toward the voices. Almost. But something my grandfather taught me held me back. The dead don't ask for help. They warn. So I stayed by my fire and listened to those voices call my name. They got closer and closer, circling the camp like wolves. But when I shined my flashlight toward the sounds, there was nothing there. Just trees and water and darkness. In the morning, I found more bone arrangements. Fresh ones. They'd been placed around my camp while I sat by the fire. A ring of animal skulls, all facing inward, all looking at me. That's when I understood. I wasn't just investigating a crime scene. I was part of it now. The backup team finally arrived around noon, 3 other rangers and a deputy sheriff. Good men, but they'd never seen anything like this. Deputy Collins took one look at the bone circles and started talking about devil worship and crazy cultists. The other rangers figured it was some kind of elaborate hoax. I knew better. But I didn't tell them about the creature I'd seen. Not yet. They already thought I was spooked. No need to make them think I was crazy, too. We spent the day collecting evidence and taking pictures. The bone arrangements were even more complex in daylight. Not random at all. They followed patterns that looked familiar, like something I'd seen in my grandfather's old books about Seminole ceremonies. Death rituals. Ways to speak with spirits. But whoever was doing this wasn't just copying old traditions. They were improving on them, making them more complex, more powerful, like they really knew what they were doing. We found more human remains as we searched deeper into the hammock. Bones from way more than 6 people. Some looked old, weathered by years in the swamp. Others were fresh. All of them had been carefully cleaned and arranged. That's when Deputy Inns found the trophy room. It was in a natural cave at the base of a huge cypress tree. The entrance was hidden by hanging moss and roots, but the smell gave it away. Inside, the walls were lined with bones. Hundreds of them, all arranged by size and type. Skulls on one shelf, femurs on another, ribs in neat stacks. But it wasn't just random collecting. Each bone had been marked with symbols, scratches and gouges that looked like primitive writing, like someone was keeping records, taking inventory of their collection. In the center of the cave was a work area, flat stones covered with bone dust and strange tools. This is where the cleaning happened, where death became art. Jesus Christ, Collins whispered. How long has this been going on? I looked at the oldest bones, the ones that had turned yellow with age. Years, maybe decades. That night, we set up a proper camp with lights and radio contact. 4 men with guns, staying together, watching each other's backs. We figured whatever was out there wouldn't be brave enough to take on an armed group. We were wrong. Around 2 a.m., the generator died. All our lights went out at once, leaving us in complete darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to restart the generator, but someone had torn out the wiring, cut the cables clean through with something sharp. That's when the bone throwing started. Femurs came flying out of the darkness, hitting our tents with wet, smacking sounds, then skulls, spinning through the air like baseballs. Whatever was throwing them had perfect aim and incredible strength. A raccoon skull hit Collins in the shoulder hard enough to knock him down. We fired our guns into the darkness, muzzle flashes lighting up the swamp for split seconds, but we couldn't see what we were shooting at. Just shadows moving between the trees, too fast and too big to be human. And then the voices started again. He missing researchers, calling our names. But now I could hear other voices too. Older ones. People who'd been dead for years, decades maybe. All of them asking us to join them. All of them promising it wouldn't hurt. By morning, Deputy Collins was gone. We found his boots by the water's edge, neatly placed side by side. His gun was on the ground next to them, fully loaded. But Collins himself had vanished without a sound. The other two rangers wanted to call for backup, maybe get a helicopter out here, but I knew that wouldn't help. This thing, whatever it was, had been hunting in these swamps for years. It knew every inch of this place. It could pick us off one by one until there was nobody left to tell the story. There was only one way to stop it. I had to go into the deep swamp and face it on its own ground. I went alone. Had to. The creature was smart enough to avoid large groups, but it seemed drawn to single targets. If I was going to find it, I needed to make myself the perfect bait. I followed the bone trails deeper into the preserve than I'd ever gone before. Miles and miles of black water and cypress trees, where the canopy was so thick that noon looked like twilight. This was the real heart of the swamp, the place my grandfather warned me never to go. The bone arrangements got bigger and more complex the deeper I went. Whole trees covered with hanging skulls. Islands where every surface was covered with neat piles of bones. It was like walking through a museum of death, curated by something that understood patterns humans had forgotten. I found Collins around sunset, what was left of him. His bones had been added to a massive ceremonial circle on a small island. But this wasn't just random killing. His skull was placed at the exact center of the pattern, surrounded by the skulls of all the other victims. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. And scratched into his forehead bone, fresh and deep, was a symbol I recognized from my grandfather's stories. The mark of a bone shaman, a spiritual leader who could speak with the dead and control the forces of death itself. That's when I understood what I was really dealing with. This wasn't just some animal that had learned to use tools. It was something that understood magic. Something that had been practicing death rituals for decades, getting stronger and smarter with each victim. The skunk ape stepped out of the trees while I was looking at Collins's remains. 9 feet tall, covered in dark fur that was matted with mud and worse things. Its eyes were intelligent, almost human, but filled with a knowledge that made my skin crawl. It didn't attack right away. Instead, it started arranging bones, moving around the ceremonial circle, adjusting skulls, straightening arm bones, working with the careful precision of an artist perfecting a masterpiece. And then it spoke to me, not with words, with bone placement. It took Collins' ribs and arranged them in a pattern that spelled out my name in the old Seminole writing my grandfather had taught me. Then it pointed at an empty space in the circle, my space, where my skull would go when it was finished with me. But I hadn't spent 20 years in these swamps for nothing, and I hadn't forgotten everything my grandfather taught me about the old ways. I started my own bone arrangement, took animal skulls from the edges of the circle and began building a counter pattern, a protection symbol, a challenge to its spiritual authority. The creature watched me work, tilting its massive head like a curious dog. Then it made that growling sound again, but this time I could hear the intelligence in it. It was laughing at me. It started building its own pattern, working faster than should have been possible, arranging bones in spirals and circles that hurt to look at directly, symbols that seemed to move when I wasn't watching them. Death magic that I could feel in my bones. We worked in silence as the sun set. 2 shamans locked in a spiritu, all duel. It would place a bone, then I would counter with my own arrangement, back and forth, building competing spells in the language of death. But I was losing. The creature knew secrets that had been lost for centuries. It was working with power I could barely comprehend. My protection symbols were weak compared to its dark magic. That's when I remembered the one thing my grandfather had taught me that might save my life. Sometimes, to defeat death magic, you have to embrace it. I broke my own protection circle, scattered the bones I'd been arranging for safety. And then I started building something else. A death pattern. A bone arrangement that would call down the spirits of every person this creature had killed. The skunk ape stopped working and stared at me. For the first time since I'd seen it, it looked uncertain, maybe even afraid. I worked faster, using Collins' bones, using the remains of the research team, using skulls that had been bleaching in this swamp for decades. calling on every ghost, every spirit, every victim who wanted justice. The creature tried to stop me. It charged across the circle, moving with incredible speed. But I was ready for it. I grabbed Colin's femur and held it like a club, and when the creature's massive hand reached for me, I brought the bone down on its wrist with all my strength. The skunk ape screamed, not a roar or a growl, but an actual human scream of pain and surprise. Black blood poured from the wound where Colin's bone had cut it. And in that blood, I saw something that nearly broke my mind. Memories. Visions of everyone this thing had killed. Decades of victims, all of them still alive somehow inside the creature. All of them trapped, aware, suffering. That's when I completed my death pattern. The last bone fell into place, and the spirits answered my call. Every victim of the skunk ape rose from their scattered remains, ghostly figures made of mist and moonlight surrounding the creature that had killed them. They reached out with phantom hands, grabbing and clawing, pulling it down into the black wat, where the creature fought them with desperate strength. But there were too many. Dozens of spirits, all of them hungry for revenge. They dragged it beneath the surface, and the swamp exploded with their combined rage. I watched from the edge of the island as the water boiled and churned, saw flashes of ghostly light beneath the surface, heard screams that seemed to come from the earth itself. And then, silence. They found me 3 days later, half dead from exposure and dehydration. I was sitting on that little island, surrounded by scattered bones, mumbling about spirits and shamans. The official report said I'd suffered a psychological breakdown from the stress of finding so many bodies. They never found the skunk ape's body. The swamp had claimed it, they said, probably dragged away by gators or dissolved in the acidic water. Case closed. But I know the truth. The creature is still down there, trapped in the black water with all the spirits it collected. Still alive, still aware, but unable to escape the prison its victims created for it. The bone collecting didn't stop when the creature died. It just changed hands. I started small. Found a bird skull on my way home from work. Seemed wrong to leave it there on the ground, so I took it with me, cleaned it carefully and placed it on my kitchen table. Just until I could figure out what to do with it. That was 6 months ago. Now my house is full of bones. Carefully arranged, methodically organized. I tell myself I'm just studying them, trying to understand what the skunk ape was doing out there in the swamp. But deep down, I know better. I can read the patterns now, see the messages hidden in bone arrangements. Sometimes late at night I hear voices whispering instructions, teaching me new ways to arrange skulls and ribs, showing me symbols that control death itself. My grandfather always said that knowledge comes with a price. The skunk ape spent decades learning the secrets of death magic, and that knowledge didn't die with it. It had to go somewhere. It had to find a new keeper. Sometimes I dream about the deep swamp, about building bone circles on hidden islands where no one will ever find them, about collecting trophies from visitors who venture too far into the preserve, about continuing the work that the creature started. When I wake up from those dreams, my hands are dirty with grave soil, and there are new bones in my collection. I still work at the preserve, still guide tourists and researchers into the safer parts of the swamp, still tell them that skunk apes are just black bears seen through beer goggles. But now I watch their faces when I talk, study their movements, wonder what their bones would look like in my collection. The preserve is still dangerous, still full of venomous snakes and hungry gators, still a place where people disappear without a trace. But the thing that hunts there now is different, smarter, more careful. It knows how to wait. My name is Joseph Nighthawk. I've been a ranger at Big Cypress National Preserve for 21 years now. And if you're planning to visit the deep swamp, if you're thinking about camping on one of those remote hammocks where the water runs black and the cypress trees grow thick, I have some advice for you. Stay on the marked trails. Don't wander off alone. And if you find bones arranged in careful patterns, if you smell that sulfur and wet dog stink, if you hear voices calling your name from the darkness, run. Because the trophy keeper of the Blackwater is still out there, still collecting, and he's always looking for new additions to his display.